My name is Matthew Carson, and I've been a park ranger at Shasta Trinity National Forest for 12 years. What I'm about to tell you isn't some campfire story or urban legend. These are events I witnessed firsthand, documented in official reports that were later classified or mysteriously lost. I'm breaking my silence because people deserve to know what lurks in America's wilderness. It started during my third year on the job. I was stationed at the remote Granite Peak Outpost, a solitary cabin 20 miles from the nearest road. My partner Ezra Williams had just transferred in from Yellowstone. He was a seasoned ranger, 15 years my senior, with graying temples and eyes that had seen too much. "You ever hear strange things out here at night?" Ezra asked during our first patrol together. It was late September, and the autumn air carried a bite that seemed to penetrate straight to the bone. "Animal calls sometimes," I replied, checking my radio. "Why?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pointed to a series of deep gouges in a massive Douglas fir. The marks were at least 9 feet up the trunk, far too high for any bear. Each claw mark was nearly 2 inches deep, and spaced wider than any known predator's paw. "Found these yesterday," he said quietly. Similar marks on 5 other trees in a perfect circle, like something was marking territory. I examined the gouges more closely. The bark was shredded and sap still oozed from the fresher wounds. What disturbed me most was the pattern, deliberate, almost intelligent. That night, the howling started. It wasn't like any wolf or coyote I'd ever heard. The sound began low, almost subsonic, vibrating through the cabin walls. Then it rose to a pitch that made my teeth ache, holding notes that no animal throat should produce. Ezra sat bolt upright in his bunk, hand instinctively reaching for his sidearm. "That's no wolf," he whispered. The howling continued for nearly an hour, sometimes close enough to rattle our windows, other times echoing from miles away. We didn't sleep that night. The next morning, we found tracks. They started at the tree line, circled our cabin 3 times, then vanished near the creek. Each print was massive, nearly 14 inches long and 7 inches wide. But what made my blood run cold was their shape, distinctly canine in the heel and pad, but with elongated toes that ended in what looked like human-like digits. "Dogman," Ezra said, his voice barely audible. "Heard about sightings up in Michigan, but never this far west." I wanted to laugh it off, dismiss it as a hoax or misidentification, but the evidence was right there, pressed deep into the soft earth. Whatever made these tracks weighed at least 300 pounds and walked on 2 legs. The stride length proved that. We reported the findings to headquarters. The response was swift and unusual. Within hours, a team arrived, not Park Service but men in unmarked vehicles who flashed federal badges and told us to forget what we'd seen. They took photos, made casts of the prints, and left without explanation. Gabriel Martinez, our district supervisor, pulled us aside afterward. "You boys are being reassigned, effective immediately." "Why?" I demanded. "We've done nothing wrong." Gabriel's expression was grim. "It's for your own safety. There are things in these woods that, well, some stones are better left unturned." But I couldn't let it go. Over the following weeks, I researched everything I could about cryptid sightings in Northern California. What I found chilled me. Dozens of missing persons cases, all hikers or hunters who vanished without a trace. Witness reports of massive bipedal canines, Native American legends warning of shapeshifters that hunted human prey. One name kept appearing in my research: Carter Blackwood, a retired ranger who'd worked these same forests in the 1980s. I tracked him down to a small cabin outside Mount Shasta. When I mentioned the dogman, his weathered face went pale. "Sit down, son," he said, pouring himself a generous glass of whiskey. "If you've seen it, you need to understand what you're dealing with." Carter told me about the winter of '87. 3 hikers had gone missing on the Pacific Crest Trail. Search and rescue found their camp destroyed, tents shredded by massive claws, blood everywhere but no bodies. Carter was part of the tracking team that followed the trail. "We found them 2 miles north," he said, his hand trembling slightly. "What was left of them anyway. Bodies torn apart, bones cracked open for marrow. But the worst part was the bite marks. Canine teeth in front, molars in back, like something caught between wolf and man." He showed me photos he'd kept hidden for decades. Even in black and white, the carnage was horrific, but one image stood out. A clear photograph of a massive, hair-covered figure standing at the edge of the forest. It stood upright, at least 7 feet tall, with the head of a wolf and the body of a man. "Forest Service buried it all," Carter continued. "Threatened our jobs, our pensions, everything if we talked. But I kept copies. Someone needs to know the truth." I returned to my new station at a more populated campground. But the encounters didn't stop. If anything, they intensified. Reports flooded in from hikers, strange howls, glimpses of massive figures moving through the trees. Pets vanishing from campsites. Then came the night that changed everything. October 31st, Halloween. I was working the late shift with my new partner, Isaac Torres. Around midnight, we received a frantic radio call from a family camping near Eagle Lake. The father, Anthony Chen, was nearly hysterical. "Something's circling our tent, it's huge. Oh God, it's trying to get in." We raced to their campsite, arriving in under 10 minutes. The scene was chaos. The family's tent was destroyed, massive claw marks rendering the fabric to ribbons. Anthony stood protectively over his wife and 2 children, wielding a camp hatchet with shaking hands. "Where did it go?" I asked, scanning the darkness with my flashlight. "That way," he pointed toward the dense undergrowth. It was enormous, walked on 2 legs like a man, but had the head of a dog or wolf. When our flashlight hit its eyes, they glowed yellow. Isaac called for backup while I examined the scene. The tracks were identical to what Ezra and I had found weeks earlier. But this time there was something else. Tufts of coarse dark fur caught on the tent's remains. I carefully collected samples, ignoring protocol. The family was evacuated, and the campsite was sealed off. By morning, the same unmarked vehicles arrived. The same men in suits who took everything and left us with stern warnings about confidentiality. But I'd hidden some of the fur samples. A friend at UC Davis ran DNA tests off the books. The results were impossible. The samples contained genetic markers from both Canis lupus, gray wolf, and Homo sapiens, human. "This can't be right," my friend said. "No hybrid like this could exist. It violates everything we know about genetics." Yet the evidence was undeniable. Something that shouldn't exist was hunting in our forests. And based on the pattern of sightings, it was becoming bolder. The first human death occurred 3 weeks later. Dylan Rodriguez was an experienced outdoorsman, the kind who could survive a week in the wilderness with nothing but a knife and his wits. When his remains were found in early December, the official report blamed a bear attack, but I saw the body. No bear did that. Dylan had been partially consumed, his flesh stripped from bones with almost surgical precision. The bite patterns were human-like, but the tooth marks suggested a jaw that could unhinge far wider than any person's. Most disturbing were the signs of systematic feeding. Whoever or whatever killed Dylan had taken their time, savoring the meal over several days. I was partnered with Lincoln Hayes for the investigation. Link, as everyone called him, was a former Marine with nerves of steel. Even he was shaken by what we found at Dylan's final campsite. "Look at this," Link said, pointing to strange symbols carved into the surrounding trees. They were crude but deliberate, twisted figures that seemed to writhe even in their static form. "Ever seen anything like these?" I had in my research into Native American folklore. The symbols resembled warnings used by the Ojibwe people to mark areas cursed by the Wendigo, a cannibalistic creature born from humans who resorted to eating flesh during desperate winters. Thomas Whitehorse, an elder from the local Shasta tribe, confirmed my suspicions when I showed him photos of the symbols. "Your friend stumbled into forbidden territory," Thomas said gravely. "These mountains have dark histories. During the harsh winter of 1846, settlers trapped by snow turned to unspeakable acts. Some say their spirits never left, transformed by their sins into something neither human nor beast." He told me about the Wendigo, creatures of insatiable hunger, forever cursed to crave human flesh. Unlike the Dogman, which seemed to be a physical creature, the Wendigo existed partially in the spirit realm, able to possess the desperate or weak-willed. "The hunger is like a disease," Thomas explained. "It spreads from one victim to the next. Those who taste human flesh, even in desperation, risk becoming Wendigo themselves." Link and I expanded our investigation, discovering a pattern of disappearances dating back decades. Every severe winter, when snow isolated the high country, people vanished. Some were found partially eaten, others were never found at all. Maverick Jones, a search and rescue volunteer, shared his own encounter from the previous winter. He'd been tracking a lost skier near Castle Lake when he found something that defied explanation. "There were human footprints in the snow," Maverick told us, "but as I followed them they changed, got longer, more distorted. The stride lengthened until whatever was walking must have been 12 feet tall. Then the tracks just ended, like it had taken flight." He showed us photos from his phone. The transformation in the tracks was undeniable, human feet gradually morphing into something monstrous. At the end of the trail, deep gouges in a tree trunk suggested something had climbed straight up, leaving claw marks no human could make. The situation escalated when a family of 4 went missing just before Christmas. The Brennan's parents Elias and Josiah with their teenage sons Charles and Caleb, had been camping in a remote area despite winter weather warnings. Their abandoned vehicle was found at a trailhead covered in a foot of fresh snow. Link and I joined the search team, along with Christopher Walsh and Ezekiel Stone from neighboring districts. As we penetrated deeper into the frozen wilderness, an oppressive atmosphere settled over us. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no small animals, even the wind seemed muted. We found the Brennan's camp on the second day. The tent stood intact but empty, sleeping bags still arranged inside. No signs of struggle, no blood. They had simply vanished. But the surrounding trees bore those same twisted symbols, carved fresh and deep. They were warned. Ezekiel muttered, examining the carvings. Whatever did this wanted them to know they were trespassing. As night fell, we made camp nearby, hoping to find clues in the morning. That's when we heard it, a sound that will haunt me forever. It started as wind through the trees, but gradually formed into words, spoken in a voice that was almost but not quite human. So hungry, so cold. The voice circled our camp, sometimes whispering, sometimes roaring. Our breath misted in air that suddenly dropped 20 degrees. Frost formed on our tents even though the weather had been mild. Christopher was the first to see it. There, he shouted, pointing his flashlight at a figure standing between two pines. It had once been human. That much was clear from the tattered remains of clothing hanging from its emaciated frame. But the transformation was horrific. The creature stood nearly 8 feet tall, its limbs elongated and twisted. Its skin was gray-white like old ash, stretched tight over bones that jutted at impossible angles. The face was the worst part, human features distorted by an impossibly wide mouth filled with rows of needle-sharp teeth. The thing smiled at us, black drool dripping from its maw. When it spoke, its voice was multiple voices. Man, woman, and children speaking in horrible unison. Join us, so hungry. Feast awaits. Link raised his rifle, but the creature moved with inhuman speed, vanishing into the darkness before he could fire. We spent the night back to back, weapons ready, as whispers and laughter echoed from the forest around us. Sometimes we glimpsed pale figures moving between the trees, not one, but several. At first light, we found new tracks leading away from our camp, human footprints that gradually transformed into something else. We followed them to a cave system hidden behind a frozen waterfall. The smell emanating from within was indescribable. Decay, old meat, and something else that triggered a primal revulsion. Inside, we found the Brennans. What was left of them had been carefully arranged in a grotesque tableau, their remains positioned as if sitting down to a family dinner. The worst part was realizing that some of the bite marks were self-inflicted. They had been compelled to consume themselves and each other. On the cave walls, written in blood, was a message. The hunger spreads. Winter feeds. Join the feast. Join the feast. We retreated, calling in every authority we could. But when the response team arrived, the cave was empty. No bodies, no blood. Even our footprints in the snow had been erased. Only the symbols on the trees remained. The official report blamed the Brennans' disappearance on an avalanche. The cave was sealed with explosives, the area marked as dangerously unstable. But Link and I knew the truth. The Wendigo had claimed them, adding their tormented spirits to its collective hunger. 3 more families vanished that winter. Each time the pattern was the same. Abandoned camps, twisted symbols, and whispers in the night of endless hunger. Search teams reported equipment failures, compasses spinning wildly, and GPS units showing locations that didn't match reality. Miles Donovan, a seasoned tracker, quit after his partner Joshua vanished during a search. 1 minute Josh was right behind me, Miles said, visibly shaken. I turned around and found only his boots standing in the snow like he'd been lifted straight out of them. Then I heard his voice from above, laughing in the trees, inviting me to dinner. By February, the Park Service had quietly closed large sections of the forest. The public was told it was due to severe weather and avalanche risk. In reality, we had lost control. Whatever darkness had awakened was spreading, and we were powerless to stop it. Spring brought a brief respite from the Wendigo encounters, but it also revealed new terrors. As the snow melted, Jackson Mitchell, a trail maintenance worker, made a discovery that would shake our understanding of what inhabited these woods. You need to see this. Jackson radioed in, his voice oddly subdued. Grid reference 41-7. And bring the biggest tape measure you can find. Isaiah Cooper and I responded to his call. What we found defied rational explanation. Pressed deep into the muddy earth was a footprint, humanoid in shape but impossibly large. The print measured 22 inches long and 9 inches wide with 5 clearly defined toes. The depth suggested something weighing at least 800 pounds. There's more, Jackson said, leading us along what appeared to be a trail. Every 8 to 10 feet, another massive print appeared. The stride length indicated something well over 9 feet tall. We followed the tracks for nearly a mile before they vanished at a creek. On the opposite bank, broken branches 15 feet up showed where something had pushed through. Whatever made these prints wasn't trying to hide. It had walked openly through the forest like it owned it. Andrew Park, our wildlife biologist, analyzed the casts we made. His conclusion was disturbing. The anatomy is essentially human, just scaled up dramatically. But the bone density required to support such mass, it shouldn't be possible. Reports of giant humanoid creatures in these forests went back generations. The local tribes spoke of the Sabe, the forest giants who lived in harmony with nature until loggers and settlers drove them deep into the wilderness. Unlike the malevolent dogman or wendigo, these beings were said to be peaceful and less provoked. That changed on a warm May evening. A group of college students camping near Mount Eddy reported that their campsite was invaded by a monster. When Nathan Cross and I arrived, we found their camp destroyed, not torn apart like the dogman attacks, but systematically dismantled. Tents had been pulled up and folded, backpacks were opened and their contents sorted into piles. Food was missing, but everything else was arranged almost thoughtfully. It was huge, stammered Nolan Wright, one of the students, at least 8 feet tall, covered in reddish-brown hair, but its eyes, they were intelligent. It looked at us like it was studying us. The creature hadn't hurt anyone. When the students screamed, it had simply turned and walked away, disappearing into the forest with surprising grace for something so large. But what struck me was Nolan's description of its face, almost human, with a heavy brow and flattened nose but undeniably aware. Adrian Silva, a photographer who'd spent years trying to document Bigfoot, contacted me after hearing about the incident. He showed me hundreds of photos taken with motion-activated cameras throughout the forest. "Look at these," he said, spreading out prints showing broken branches, disturbed vegetation, and shadowy figures at the edge of clarity. "I've been tracking movement patterns for 5 years. There's a population of at least a dozen in this area alone." One photo stood out, taken just a month earlier. It showed a massive figure silhouetted against the sunset. The proportions were human-like but impossibly large. In its hand, it carried what appeared to be a crude spear. "They're not animals," Adrian insisted. "They make tools, have territories, possibly even a language. I've recorded vocalizations that seem to be communication." He played audio files of deep resonant calls that echoed through the forest. Some were simple whoops and howls, but others had a complexity that suggested meaning beyond basic animal sounds. In one recording, 2 distinct voices seemed to be exchanging information in a pattern too structured to be random. Our understanding shifted from viewing Bigfoot as a cryptid to recognizing it as another form of intelligent life sharing our forests. But this revelation came with complications. Cameron Torres, a logger working in a restricted area, had an encounter that turned violent. He'd been marking trees for cutting when something massive struck him from behind, sending him flying 20 feet. When he looked up, a creature towering over 9 feet tall stood between him and his equipment. "It didn't want me there," Cameron told me from his hospital bed, nursing 3 broken ribs and a dislocated shoulder. "It pointed at me, then at my truck, then made a gesture I understood clear as day, 'Get out.'" When Cameron tried to retrieve his chainsaw, the creature picked it up and bent it in half with its bare hands, tossing the ruined tool at his feet. The message was clear: stay out of its territory. More concerning were reports from Santiago Reyes and Eli Harper, both experienced hunters who'd witnessed what they described as Bigfoot hunting parties. Multiple creatures working together, using coordination and strategy to drive deer into ambushes. "They're not just surviving out there," Santiago said. "They're thriving, and they're getting bolder." The tipping point came in late June. Aaron Williams, age 8, vanished from a family picnic area in broad daylight. Witnesses reported seeing a large, hair-covered figure watching the group from the tree line throughout the day. When Aaron wandered slightly away from the group to chase a butterfly, he simply disappeared. The search was massive. Ryan Miller led a team of 24 rangers and volunteers, scouring every inch of forest. Cooper Anderson brought in tracking dogs, but they refused to follow the scent trail, whimpering and cowering when directed towards certain areas. On the 3rd day, something extraordinary happened. Waylon Price, searching alone despite protocol, found Aaron. The boy was unharmed, sitting in a cave 5 miles from where he'd vanished. He was clean, well-fed, and oddly calm. "The hairy giant took care of me," Aaron told us. "She gave me berries and water. She sang to me when I was scared." Aaron described a female Bigfoot who had apparently rescued him from a steep ravine he'd fallen into. She'd carried him to safety and watched over him, even bringing him cooked meat and showing him edible plants. When she heard the search parties approaching, she'd left him where he'd be found. The cave showed evidence of habitation, beds of dried grass, stored food, even crude paintings on the walls depicting forest scenes. It was a home, not just a shelter. This incident forced us to reconsider our approach. These weren't monsters to be feared or animals to be captured. They were intelligent beings with their own culture and apparent compassion. But they were also becoming more territorial as human encroachment increased. Easton Clark, a wilderness guide, proposed a radical solution, designated no-go zones where the Bigfoot could live undisturbed. The Park Service publicly scoffed at the idea, but privately, certain areas were quietly marked as off-limits for environmental restoration. By autumn, the forest had become a battlefield between forces we barely understood. The Dogman grew bolder, attacking closer to populated areas. The Wendigo incidents increased as the weather cooled, and the Bigfoot population seemed to be migrating, their movements suggesting they were fleeing something. Kai Morrison and Christian Davis were conducting a wildlife survey when they witnessed something that connected all three phenomena. Hidden in a blind, they observed a confrontation that challenged everything we thought we knew. A Bigfoot family group was foraging in a meadow, Kai reported. 2 adults and what looked like a juvenile. Then this thing came out of the forest. The creature Kai described matched our Dogman reports, 7 feet tall, covered in dark fur, with the head of a wolf and the body of a man. But instead of attacking, it approached the Bigfoot group, making submissive gestures. They communicated, Christian added, not in words but in growls, gestures, body language. The Bigfoot seemed to be warning the Dogman about something. Then they all looked north and scattered like something terrifying was coming. Minutes later, the temperature plummeted. Frost spread across the meadow in seconds. The Wendigo emerged from the tree line, not 1 but 3 of them moving with jerky, unnatural gaits. They searched the area where the creatures had been, their frustration evident in human shrieks that echoed across the valley. This wasn't random coincidence. The various entities in our forest were aware of each other, possibly even organizing. But why? What was driving this unprecedented behavior? Landon Foster, an anthropologist studying Native American folklore, offered a theory. In tribal legends, these beings have always existed in balance. The Sadi as protectors, the Dogmen as hunters, the Wendigo as a cautionary force. But something has disrupted that balance. He pointed to increased logging, mining exploration, and tourist development. Human activity wasn't just encroaching on habitat, it was disturbing something fundamental about these forests. Colton Vance, working the night shift at a remote ranger station, experienced this disruption firsthand. He radioed in a panic just after midnight, reporting his station was under siege. Roman Torres and I responded, finding the station's windows shattered and deep claw marks covering the walls. Colton was barricaded in the equipment room, clutching a shotgun with shaking hands. They were fighting each other, he gasped. The Dogman and one of those gray things, the Wendigo. They tore into each other right outside my window. The sounds, God, the sounds they made. Blood covered the ground outside. Some red, some black, and tar-like. Tufts of fur and chunks of gray flesh littered the area. Whatever conflict was brewing had erupted into open violence. Hunter Chen, analyzing the blood samples, made a shocking discovery. The Wendigo tissue showed signs of infection, not bacterial or viral, but something that seemed to be rewriting its cellular structure. It's breaking down, Hunter explained. Whatever supernatural force animates these things, it's failing. They're dying, and they're desperate. This explained the increased aggression. The Wendigo weren't just hunting. They were trying to reproduce, to spread their curse before they were wiped out entirely. And they saw the other forest entities as either threats or potential hosts. Jonathan Ruiz witnessed the full horror of this desperation. While checking trail cameras, he discovered footage of a Wendigo attack on a Bigfoot. The massive creature fought valiantly, its strength incredible, but the Wendigo, its unnatural abilities, phasing in and out of visibility, impossibly fast movements, and numbing cold, eventually overwhelmed it. The worst part was what happened after, Jonathan said, visibly shaken. The Wendigo didn't just kill it, it converted it. The Bigfoot rose up, its eyes now black, frost covering its fur. It had become some kind of hybrid. These Wendigo-possessed Bigfoot were abominations, combining the physical power of the forest giants with the supernatural hunger of the cursed spirits. They were nearly unstoppable, and their numbers were growing. Connor Black organized armed patrols, but conventional weapons proved marginally effective. Bullets slowed them down but didn't stop them. Fire seemed to work better, but starting forest fires brought its own risks. Micah Stevens, studying Native American remedies, discovered references to sacred rituals that could combat the Wendigo. Working with tribal elders, he learned about specific herbs and ceremonies that might weaken the creature's hold on our reality. The Wendigo exist partially in the spirit world, Micah explained. Physical attacks alone won't stop them. We need to sever their connection to this plane. Jeremiah Wright led the first attempt at a spiritual cleansing. Armed with sage, sacred tobacco, and artifacts blessed by tribal shamans, a team entered one of the most active areas. What they found changed everything. In a hidden valley deep in the wilderness, we discovered the source of the escalation. Ezekiel Stone, mapping cave systems, had found an abandoned military installation from the 1950s. Classified documents left behind revealed Project Cryptid, government experiments attempting to weaponize supernatural entities. They were trying to create super soldiers, Ezekiel said, showing us files detailing genetic experiments, attempts at summoning and binding forest spirits, and worse. They captured specimens, tried to replicate their abilities, but something went wrong. The facility had been abandoned in a hurry. Cages were torn open from the inside. Dark stains covered laboratory floors, and in the deepest level we found the horror that had been unleashed. A massive containment chamber had been breached. Inside, occult symbols mixed with scientific equipment suggested an attempt to artificially create a Wendigo, to harness its power without the need for cannibalism or curses. They had partially succeeded. Adam Chen, our hazmat specialist, detected residual energy that was still active. Whatever they summoned or created, it's been leaking into the environment for decades. It's corrupting the natural order. This explained everything. The increasing aggression, the territorial disputes, the Wendigo infection spreading to other creatures. It all stemmed from this unnatural source, poisoning the spiritual ecosystem of the forest. Aidan Murphy coordinated our response, working with tribal elders, military contacts who confirmed the facility's existence, and every ranger who'd encountered these entities. We developed a plan. We couldn't fight these creatures conventionally. We had to heal the forest itself. The operation began on the winter solstice, when the veil between worlds was thinnest. Grayson Lake led technical teams to contain the facility's energy leaks. Jordan Martinez organized protective details armed with blessed ammunition and flame weapons. Ian Cross coordinated with Native American spiritual leaders for the cleansing ritual. As night fell, the forest erupted. Every entity seemed to sense what we were attempting. Dogmen howled from multiple directions. Bigfoot families emerged from hiding, not to attack but to observe, and the Wendigo came in force. Carson Reed's team held the perimeter as shamans began their ceremony. The battle was surreal. Modern weapons and ancient magic combined against creatures of legend. I watched a dogman charge through automatic rifle fire, only to recoil from a line of sacred salt. A Wendigo-possessed Bigfoot shrugged off flashbang grenades but fled from burning sage. Axel Thompson documented everything, knowing the world needed to see the truth. His footage showed Jace Williams, a young ranger, standing firm as a Wendigo approached, chanting prayers his grandmother had taught him. The creature's advance slowed, its form flickering as if caught between realities. The turning point came when Dominic Gray's team managed to seal the breach in the containment facility. Using a combination of concrete, lead shielding, and sacred symbols provided by the elders, they cut off the flow of corrupted energy. The effect was immediate. The Wendigo began screaming, their forms becoming less solid. Some collapsed into ash and shadow. Others fled north, their power diminishing with each step. The possessed Bigfoot shuddered and collapsed, the dark influence leaving their bodies. But we'd underestimated the dogman. As the other threats retreated, the dogmen pressed their attack. Leonardo Vega realized why. With the Wendigo weakened and the Bigfoot vulnerable, they saw an opportunity to claim territory. "They're not monsters," Leonardo said as we watched them coordinate their assault. "They're predators taking advantage of chaos." The final confrontation was brutal. Bryson White led a desperate defense as waves of dogmen tried to break through to the ritual site. We lost good people that night, rangers who stood their ground against nightmares to protect something larger than themselves. As dawn broke, the ceremony concluded. The forest felt different, cleaner, lighter. The oppressive atmosphere that had built over months dissipated. The surviving Wendigo had fled to the far north, weakened perhaps permanently. The Bigfoot melted back into the deep woods, traumatized but free. And the dogmen, faced with unified resistance and the loss of the chaos they'd exploited, retreated to whatever hidden dens they called home. Everett Scott surveyed the aftermath. 7 rangers dead, dozens injured. The facility was sealed permanently, its secrets buried under tons of concrete and sacred earth. Official reports blamed a forest fire for the casualties and a chemical leak for the evacuations. But those of us who were there knew the truth. We'd fought a war against forces beyond normal understanding and somehow prevailed. The forest was safe for now. Parker Hayes transferred out immediately, unable to cope with what he'd seen. Caden Brown took medical leave and never returned. But most of us stayed. Someone had to guard against the darkness, to ensure the balance we'd restored held. 6 months have passed since that night. The forest has returned to relative normalcy. Hikers camp unmolested. Wildlife follows natural patterns. But we remain vigilant, because we know they're still out there. Weston Cole maintains monitoring stations throughout the park, tracking any unusual activity. Jason Mitchell leads monthly patrols to check the sealed facility. Emmett Rodriguez works with tribal elders to maintain protective barriers. The dogmen have been spotted occasionally, always at distance, always watching. They've learned caution, perhaps respect. The Bigfoot remain hidden, but sometimes leave gifts at ranger stations, carved stones, useful herbs, silent acknowledgments of our shared secret. The Wendigo haven't returned, but sometimes on the coldest nights we hear distant screams from the north. They're weakened, not destroyed. Evil that ancient doesn't die easily. Sawyer Adams asked me why I stay. Why any of us remain after experiencing such horrors. The answer is simple. Someone has to stand guard. Someone has to ensure that what was unleashed never spreads beyond these forests. We are rangers, protectors of both the natural and supernatural world. We've seen monsters and legends, fought battles the public will never know about, and will continue watching, waiting, ready for when the darkness tries to return. Because it will return. It always does. In the depths of the American wilderness, ancient powers stir. Creatures from nightmare and legend walk among the trees, and a thin line of men and women stand between them and an unsuspecting world. We are that line. We hold it, no matter what comes howling out of the dark. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that someone knows what's happening out here in the Cascade National Forest. I've been a park ranger for 15 years, and I thought I'd seen everything these woods had to offer. I was wrong. It started 3 weeks ago when I found Matthew Chen's abandoned campsite near Devil's Creek. Matthew was an experienced hiker, the kind who filed detailed itineraries and never missed a check-in. His tent was still standing, sleeping bag laid out, food supplies untouched. The only thing missing was Matthew himself. The tracks around his campsite made no sense. They started as bare human footprints leading away from the tent, but after about 30 yards they changed. The prints elongated, the toes spreading wider with each step, claw marks appearing in the soft earth. By the time they reached the tree line, they weren't human anymore. They were something else entirely. 7 inches wide, 18 inches long, with a stride that covered nearly 8 feet. I radioed it in, but my supervisor, Ezra Williams, told me to mark it as a probable bear encounter. Don't start rumors, he said. But I've tracked bears for years. Bears don't leave prints like that. Bears don't walk upright for hundreds of yards. And bears certainly don't leave scratch marks 15 feet up on tree trunks. The search team found fragments of Matthew's jacket 2 miles north, shredded and covered in a substance that wasn't quite saliva, wasn't quite blood. The lab results came back inconclusive. That's when they stopped looking. But I kept finding things. Tufts of coarse, reddish-brown hair caught on branches at heights no known animal in these parts could reach. Trees with their bark stripped away in perfect spirals, as if something with hands had methodically peeled them. And the smell, God, the smell, like wet dog mixed with rotting meat, and something else. Something musky and primitive that made every instinct scream at me to run. Gabriel Torres, another ranger working the eastern sector, mentioned he'd been finding mutilated deer carcasses, not killed by predators in any normal way. These animals had been torn apart with deliberate cruelty, their organs arranged in patterns around the bodies. He showed me photos before the Forest Service made him delete them. The arrangement looked almost ritualistic. Then came the night sounds. Every ranger knows the forest changes after dark, but this was different. It started as a low howl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Not wolf, not coyote, not mountain lion. It would begin as something almost human, a mournful wail that raised every hair on my body, then descend into something bestial, guttural, wrong. Carter Phillips, who'd been stationed here for 20 years, went pale when I described it to him. "You need to request a transfer," he said, his hands shaking as he lit his 3rd cigarette in 10 minutes. This happened before, back in '97. 3 hikers disappeared. They found pieces. Just pieces. The Forest Service buried the reports. I didn't believe him until I found the cave. It was hidden behind a waterfall about 4 miles off the main trail, only accessible if you knew exactly where to place your feet on the slippery rocks. The smell hit me before I even entered, that same wrong smell, but concentrated, overwhelming. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness and landed on bones. Human bones mixed with deer, elk, even what looked like bear. All of them showed teeth marks, but the bite radius was impossible, too wide for any predator I knew. On the cave walls were scratches that might have been claw marks or might have been writing. In the center of the cave was a depression in the earth, roughly 7 feet long and 3 feet wide, shaped like something large had been sleeping there regularly. The dirt was packed down and warm to the touch, even though it was 40 degrees outside. That's when I heard breathing behind me. Not the quick pants of an animal, but slow, deliberate breaths. Controlled. Intelligent. I turned around, and for just a moment my flashlight caught eyes reflecting back at me. Yellow, set too far apart, too high off the ground. Then it was gone, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, and when I finally stopped, I realized I'd been hurted. Whatever it was had pushed me away from the cave, back toward the ranger station, like a shepherd guiding sheep. The next morning, Isaac Morrison, a ranger from the Northern Post, reported over the radio that he'd found tracks circling his cabin all night. The same impossible tracks, starting human, ending as something else. He'd sat inside with his rifle aimed at the door, listening to something testing the windows, scratching at the walls. When sunrise came and he finally ventured outside, he found a message scratched in the dirt. Leave. We're not leaving. We can't. This is our job, our responsibility. But more things are happening now. The incidents are escalating. And I'm starting to think Carter was right about 1997, and that whatever happened then is happening again now. The second wave of encounters began with Jaden Brooks, a seasonal ranger who just started his third month with us. He was doing a routine patrol near Elk Ridge when his radio crackled to life at 2:47 a.m. His voice was barely a whisper. Something's following me. Multiple somethings. They're walking upright. By the time we reached his last known position, we found his equipment scattered across a quarter-mile stretch of forest. His radio was smashed against a tree with such force it had embedded into the bark. His backpack was torn open, contents methodically sorted, food taken, everything else left in neat piles. We found Jaden himself 3 hours later, alive but catatonic, sitting in the middle of a perfect circle of broken trees. Each tree had been snapped at exactly the same height, 7 feet, and bent outward like something had exploded from the center. When Jaden finally spoke 6 hours later in the medical station, he kept repeating the same thing. Dog faces, human eyes. Dog faces, human eyes. The psychologist they brought in said it was trauma-induced hallucination. But Luca Bennett, who'd been first on scene with me, pulled me aside later. I saw the tracks around those broken trees, he said. Canine, but wrong. The front paws had thumbs. That night, we got our first clear sighting. Anthony Reeves was manning the fire watchtower when he called it in. His voice was steady, professional, even as he described the impossible. I've got visual on 3 large bipedal creatures moving through Sector 7. They're using the deer trails but walking upright. Estimated height 7 to 8 feet. They're coordinated, moving in formation. I grabbed the night vision binoculars and climbed to the tower's observation deck. Anthony pointed toward the valley, his hand trembling slightly. Through the green-tinted view I saw them. 3 figures, impossibly tall and lean, covered in what looked like fur but moved like fabric in the wind. Their legs were bent wrong like a dog's hind legs forced to support an upright frame, but it was their heads that made my blood freeze. Elongated snouts, pointed ears, but they turned and observed their surroundings with human-like deliberation. They're hunting, Anthony whispered. Watch. The creatures spread out, 2 flanking while 1 moved up the center of the valley. They were herding something, a group of elk, but instead of attacking like animals, they seemed to be selecting. 1 creature actually pointed with what looked like a clawed hand at a specific elk. The others nodded. Human gestures, animal bodies. Dylan Cross, monitoring from the southern tower, came over the radio. I've got visual on your subjects moving into Sector 8. There's more of them. Count 7, maybe 8. They're converging on something. We watched them gather at a clearing. In the center was the elk they'd selected, but it wasn't running. It stood perfectly still, as if hypnotized. The creatures circled it, and then in perfect synchronization they began to howl. Not the random chaos of wolves or coyotes, but a structured sound, almost melodic. The elk collapsed without being touched. Lincoln Shaw, our senior ranger, had been silent through all of this. Finally, he spoke. In 1983, I was stationed in Michigan, Upper Peninsula. We had a series of attacks that matched this pattern. The locals called it Dogman, said it appeared every 10 years. The government classified everything, transferred me here, told me to forget what I saw. He paused, looking through the binoculars. They're not animals, they're not human, they're something in between, something that shouldn't exist. The creatures dragged the elk into the forest, walking upright, carrying it like humans would. Before they disappeared into the trees, 1 turned and looked directly at our tower. Even at that distance I could see it smile. Not an animal's expression of aggression, but a human smile of acknowledgement. It knew we were watching. It wanted us to know it knew. Thomas Rodriguez found the remains the next morning. The elk had been butchered with precision cuts that suggested tool use, but the tools themselves were nowhere to be found. Some parts were missing entirely, taken. Around the carcass he found prints of both the elongated canine feet and human hands pressed into the earth as if the creatures had knelt like humans during their work. But the worst discovery was the shelter. Maverick Jones and Elias Kim were investigating a series of missing hiker reports when they found it, a structure built between 3 large pines about 12 feet off the ground. It was constructed from branches, bones, and strips of fabric that forensics later identified as coming from missing hikers' clothing. Inside were beds made from pine needles and fur, tools fashioned from antlers and stones, and walls decorated with mud paintings showing bipedal wolves hunting humans. "They're not just passing through," Maverick said at our emergency meeting. "They're living here. They've claimed this territory." Josiah Wright, who'd been analyzing the patterns of sightings and attacks, laid out a map. "They're systematic. They take one human for every 10 animals they hunt, always at specific moon phases, always from specific areas. It's not random predation, it's population management, like they're farming us." The Forest Service tried to bring in a special containment team, but Charles Anderson, who'd been liaising with them, reported they never made it to the park. "Found their vehicles abandoned on the access road," he said. "Doors open, engines running, no sign of the team, just more of those tracks leading into the forest. We're not dealing with a single creature or even a simple pack. This is a society, a civilization of things that exist between species, and they're not hiding anymore. They want us to know they're here. The question is, what do they want from us, and how long before they decide to take it?" The temperature dropped 20 degrees in 3 hours. Caleb Martinez at the weather station said it was impossible. No front, no pressure change, just sudden, bone-deep cold. That's when Christopher Vance called in his final report. "Something's wrong with Sector 12, his voice crackled over the radio. "The birds are gone. Everything's gone. It's too quiet and—" The transmission cut to static. Then something else came through. A sound like wind through teeth forming words. "So hungry. So cold." Ezekiel Foster and I found Christopher's post abandoned, the door torn off its hinges from the inside. The walls were covered in ice, but not normal ice. It grew in patterns like veins, spreading from claw marks that went deep into the wood. Christopher's journal was still open on his desk, the last entry reading. It spoke to me in James's voice. James has been dead for 3 months. It knew things only James would know. The Wendigo had come. Miles Park, our eldest ranger at 73, went pale when we described what we'd found. "My grandmother was Ojibwe," he said. "She told me about the Wendigo, the hunger that walks. It was human once, but cannibalism in winter, desperation and darkness transformed it into something else. It brings the cold with it, and it's never ever satisfied." That night Jackson Turner was on patrol when he encountered it. His report, delivered in person because he refused to speak about it over radio, chilled us all. "I was checking the Morrison Trail when the temperature dropped so fast my breath turned to ice crystals. The trees started creaking, not from wind, but like something was draining the life from them. Then I saw it. 15 feet tall, maybe more. Its skin was pulled tight like leather over 2 long bones. No lips, just teeth. Human teeth in rows like a shark. Its fingers were icicles that moved, but the worst was its chest. I could see through it, see its heart beating black blood through visible veins. And it was looking at me with human eyes, crying frozen tears." Isaiah Chen had been studying unusual wildlife behavior patterns when he made a connection. "Every animal migration path has shifted in the last 2 weeks. They're all avoiding a specific area, a circle about 3 miles wide centered on the old Donner camping ground." The Donner camping ground, where 40 years ago a group of hikers got stranded in an unexpected blizzard. Only one survived. Andrew Collins, who'd researched the incident, found the survivor's testimony in the archives. "We ran out of food after 5 days. Tom said we had to survive. Said it was natural, part of nature. We did what we had to do. But Tom didn't stop after the rescue came. He went back into the woods. They never found him." Joshua Miller reported finding a den made entirely of frozen human remains near the Donner site. "They were arranged like architecture," he said, his voice hollow. "Bones as support beams, frozen flesh as walls. And inside there were fresh additions, people who'd gone missing this month." Nathan Cross and Nolan White were investigating when the Wendigo attacked in daylight, unprecedented behavior. Nathan survived, but lost 3 fingers to frostbite that occurred in seconds when the creature touched him. "It asked me my name," he said from his hospital bed. "When I told it, it said, 'Nathan tastes like fear. Good, marinate longer.' Then it let me go." Adrian Mitchell found evidence that the Wendigo was once Thomas Brennan, the Tom from the Donner incident. His ranger ID, the one reported lost 40 years ago, was frozen in the center of the ice cave den. But what Adrian found next changed everything. Scattered around the den were recent journal entries written in frozen blood on human skin. The entries described hunger that never ended, cold that came from inside, and worst of all, full awareness of what he'd become. "I remember being human," one entry read. "I remember warmth. I remember being satisfied after a meal. Now I eat and feel nothing but more hunger. I see my reflection in the ice and weep for what I was, but I cannot stop. The hunger won't let me stop." Cameron Hayes, tracking migration patterns, discovered the Wendigo wasn't alone. There are at least 3, he reported. Different sizes, different hunting patterns, like it's converting others. Santiago Ruiz confirmed this when he found a halfway transformed victim still alive. The man, identified as a missing hiker from 2 weeks prior, was found in a cave, his skin already turning to that leather-like texture, his teeth multiplying in his mouth. He begged Santiago to kill him. I can feel it taking over. The hunger is starting. Please, before I become like it. Please. The Forest Service ordered us not to engage, but Eli Sullivan had other ideas. Fire, he said. The old stories say fire is the only thing that stops them. We need to burn them out. But Aaron Clark, who'd been analyzing the ice patterns, stopped him. Look at the data. Every time the temperature drops, the affected area expands. They're changing the environment, making it suitable for more of them. If we attack and fail, they might accelerate the process. Ryan Torres was the first to suggest the unthinkable. What if they're working together, the Dogmen and the Wendigo? What if this isn't random monster attacks but coordinated territorial expansion? Angel Vasquez found evidence supporting this theory. Tracks of both creatures converging at specific points, avoiding each other's hunting grounds, even sharing kills. They have a treaty or understanding, he said. They're dividing our forest between them. Cooper Smith disappeared that night. We found him 3 days later, standing in the middle of a frozen lake that shouldn't have been frozen in September. He was alive but changed. His skin had that leather texture, his teeth had multiplied, but he was fighting it. It's in my head, he gasped. The hunger. It shows me what I could become, shows me how to spread the cold. I can hear them all, every Wendigo that ever was. They're all connected, all hungry, all coming here. Waylon Foster managed to get Cooper to a containment facility, but during transport, Cooper gave us crucial intelligence. The first snow, he whispered. When the first real snow comes, they'll all emerge, dozens of them. They're waiting under the ice, in caves, in places where winter never fully left. And once they're all here, the transformation of the forest will be complete. It will become their territory forever. The Weather Service predicts unseasonable snow within the week. We're not ready. I don't think we can ever be ready for what's coming. Easton Gray was the first to report the massive footprints 24 inches long, 8 inches wide with a stride that covered 6 feet. They appeared overnight around his remote station, circling it repeatedly as if something had spent hours studying the building. But it wasn't just the size that disturbed him. It was the intelligence behind them. The tracks showed where the creature had stopped to peer through windows, had tested the door handle, had even attempted to manipulate the outdoor equipment.
This wasn't an animal passing through, Easton told us. Something was learning about us.
Kay Morrison, despite her initial skepticism, changed her position after finding hair samples on a broken tree branch 14 feet off the ground. The hair was unlike anything in our databases, structurally similar to human hair but twice as thick, with a medullary pattern that suggested an unknown primate. The DNA results came back as contaminated or inconclusive, but Kay knew better. It's not contaminated, she said. It's just nothing our systems recognize. Christian Walsh had been investigating a series of wood knocks, rhythmic banging sounds that echoed through the forest at night. He'd assumed it was hikers or pranksters until he triangulated the source. Whatever's making these sounds is moving between positions miles apart in minutes, he reported. And the patterns are consistent. It's communication. Landon Young made the connection we'd all been avoiding. He compiled 60 years of reports from our forest and found a clear pattern. Every decade, sightings of large bipedal hair-covered creatures increased dramatically, always preceding major disappearances. The locals had various names for it: Sasquatch, Bigfoot, the Wild Man, but the descriptions were always consistent: 8 to 10 feet tall, covered in hair, impossibly strong and intelligent enough to avoid direct contact with humans, usually. Colton Rivera's encounter changed everything. He was investigating a destroyed campsite when he came face to face with it. I rounded a large boulder, and there it was, crouched down, examining a smartphone from the destroyed camp. It was using its fingers to swipe through photos. When it noticed me, it didn't run. It stood up. God, it must have been 9 feet tall, and looked at me with these incredibly human eyes. Brown, intelligent, almost sad. Then it spoke. Not words exactly, but vocalizations that sounded like it was trying to form words. It pointed at the phone, then at itself, then at me, like it was trying to explain something. Roman Davis, monitoring from the tower, witnessed the creature leave. It didn't lumber or crash through the forest like you'd expect, he said. It moved with purpose, even grace, avoiding every camera we had set up. It knew where they were. It's been watching us as much as we've been trying to watch it. Hunter Kim found their structures. Not dens or nests, but actual constructed shelters. These are engineering marvels, he said, showing us photos. Branches woven together in complex patterns, using physics I barely understand to support massive weight. And inside, we found tools. Rocks shaped for specific purposes, wooden implements carved with precision. This isn't some missing link, this is a parallel civilization. Jonathan Torres discovered what might have been their writing. Deep in a cave system, he found walls covered in symbols made with natural pigments. Some seemed to represent landscape features, others might have been counting systems, and some appeared to tell stories. One series of images clearly showed the progression of human encroachment into the forest, stick figures multiplying, trees falling, and then larger figures retreating deeper into the wilderness. Connor Murphy was analyzing sound recordings when he isolated something remarkable. The wood knocks aren't random, he explained. They're a complex language. Different patterns mean different things. 3 knocks followed by 2 is a warning. 4 rapid knocks is a gathering call. And there's one pattern, 7 knocks with specific timing that always precedes a sighting. They're announcing themselves. Micah Brown had been leaving food at specific locations, trying to establish peaceful contact. It worked, but not how he expected. One morning he found his offerings gone and replaced with gifts, perfectly carved wooden figurines depicting various forest animals, and one that was unmistakably a human. They're trying to communicate, he said. They understand the concept of exchange. But then Jeremiah Cox found the warning. It was a massive tree, ancient and thick, that had been pushed over to block a main trail. Carved into its trunk in letters 3 feet tall was a single word, stop. The carving was fresh, the sap still running, and around it were those massive footprints. Ezekiel Stone's thermal drone footage revealed the scope of what we were dealing with. There are at least 12 individuals living in our forest, he reported. They have designated areas, patrol routes, and gathering places. They're not solitary, they're a community. Adam West was first to observe their interaction with the other creatures. They're apex, he said. The dogmen avoid their territory. The Wendigo won't enter certain valleys. Even that thing in the cave respects their boundaries. They're not just another monster in these woods. They might be what's keeping the others in check. Aidan Clark found evidence of their intelligence that shook us all. In an abandoned research station from the 1970s, he discovered journals from a scientist who claimed to have made contact. The entries described teaching one of the creatures basic written English, exchanging information about their respective species. The final entry read, "They call themselves the first people. They say they were here before humans, will be here after. They say the forest is sick, that other things have come that shouldn't be here. They say a choice is coming, coexistence or catastrophe." Grayson Hill reported finding a territorial marker, trees bent and woven together to form an archway. Beyond it he felt watched constantly but was never threatened. "It's like crossing into someone's home," he said. "As long as you're respectful, they tolerate you. But I found camping equipment from missing hikers scattered just outside these markers. People who didn't respect the boundaries." Jordan Lake made the most disturbing discovery. In a valley that maps showed as empty, he found evidence of structures going back centuries, the same construction techniques, the same symbols, layers of habitation. "They've been here all along," he said, "generation after generation, watching us encroach, adapting, surviving. We're not discovering them. They're deciding whether to reveal themselves." Ian Foster was reviewing historical records when he found reports from indigenous peoples describing treaties with the hairy giants, agreements about territory, mutual avoidance, even cooperation during harsh winters. These weren't legends or myths, they were historical documents describing diplomatic relations with another intelligent species. Carson Pierce had the last encounter of this phase. He was trapped by an early blizzard in a remote valley when one of them appeared. "It watched me struggling to build shelter," he said. "Then it built one for me. In minutes it constructed a windbreak that saved my life. Before it left, it pointed at the darkening sky, then at the direction of the ranger station, then held up 3 fingers. I didn't understand until later. It was telling me I had 3 hours before the worst of the storm. It was right. The evidence is undeniable. We're not alone in these forests. We never were. And now, with the other creatures becoming more aggressive, with territories shifting and boundaries breaking down, the giants are making themselves known. The question isn't whether they exist, it's what they want from us, and whether we're smart enough to listen." Axel Morgan was the first to notice the pattern. All the creatures were moving toward the center of the forest, toward Black Mountain. The dogmen abandoned their hunting grounds, the Wendigo left their frozen dens, and even the giants' careful pathways all led to the same destination. "Something's calling them," Jess Thompson said, studying the migration patterns. "These aren't random movements, they're being summoned." Dominic Cruz found the first ritual site, a clearing where the ground was burned in a perfect circle 40 feet across with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Inside the circle were offerings, bones arranged in specific patterns, stones covered in what looked like writing but in no language we recognized, and at the center a metal object that predated any known human presence in the area. Leonardo Banks analyzed the metal artifact. This isn't from any known civilization, he reported. The metallurgy is impossible. Elements that don't occur naturally in these proportions worked with techniques we don't have. And it's old, really old. Predating human civilization old. Bryson White discovered that Black Mountain itself was artificial. The geology doesn't make sense, he explained. This isn't a natural formation. Something built this, covered it over millennia, made it look natural. But underneath, there's structure, chambers, passages, architecture. Everett Davis was monitoring seismic equipment when he detected regular pulses coming from inside the mountain. Every 12 hours like clockwork, he said. Something's alive in there, or at least active. Parker Mills found the entrance, hidden behind a waterfall that shouldn't exist. The water flowed upward for several feet before falling. Inside was a tunnel that descended at impossible angles, with walls covered in the same symbols from the ritual site. The air inside was wrong, thick with electricity and something else, something that made every instinct scream danger. Caden Ross volunteered to explore the tunnel. He made it 500 feet before his equipment started failing, cameras showing impossible geometry, compass spinning wildly. His last transmission was barely audible. There's something massive down here, ancient, and it knows we're here. Weston Cole found Caden 3 days later alive but changed. His eyes reflected light like an animal's. He couldn't tolerate temperatures above 40 degrees, and he spoke in languages that didn't exist. When he finally became lucid, he gave us a warning. It's been sleeping. The mountain is a cage, and all these creatures, they're either guards or prisoners. I can't tell which, but something else is coming to open it. Jason Martinez's research revealed the truth about the 1997 incident Carter had mentioned. It wasn't just hikers who disappeared. An entire government black site had been constructed to study the mountain. And overnight all 43 personnel vanished. The only survivor was found 3 states away, aged 20 years in a single night. Repeating one phrase, the convergence comes every 1,000 years. Emmett Taylor found the countdown. In a hidden cave, symbols were being added to the walls daily by whom or what we couldn't determine. But Nicholas Vega, who'd studied ancient mathematics, recognized it as a numerical sequence. If each symbol represents a day, he said, then whatever this is counting down to happens in 6 days. Sawyer Anderson witnessed the first gathering. Under the full moon, he watched dozens of creatures meet at the mountain's base. Not just the ones we'd encountered, but things we'd never seen. Shadows that moved independently of their sources. Lights that burned cold. Creatures that seemed to phase in and out of existence. They weren't fighting, Sawyer reported. They were organizing, taking positions like an army preparing for battle. Brooks Williams found human cultists among them. People who'd gone missing over the years, transformed or converted, serving these entities. They wore robes made from human skin and spoke in harmonics that shouldn't come from human throats. One approached our perimeter and left a message. The keeper wakes, the door opens, the old world returns. Bennett Clark's thermal imaging revealed the scope of what was beneath the mountain. It's massive, he said, showing us the data. Something at least 200 feet long, generating heat signatures that spike whenever the creatures gather above it. And it's moving more. Whatever's down there is waking up. Silas Foster intercepted radio transmissions, not from our equipment but from somewhere else. The messages were in English but made little sense. Containment breach imminent, Protocol 7 fails, extinction event probable, seal compromised. It remembers, it hungers, it rises. Damian Young found the journal of a Forest Service director from 1952, hidden in a forgotten archive. It described a secret program to monitor and contain xenobiological anomalies in the forest. The final entry: we thought we were studying them. We were wrong. They've been farming us, preparing us. We're not researchers, we're the offering. Vincent Gray discovered caves beneath our own ranger stations, tunnels that connected every outpost we'd built. We'd constructed our entire infrastructure above an existing network without knowing it. The creatures had been moving beneath us all along, listening, learning, waiting. Chase Morgan was on duty when the earthquake started, not natural ones but rhythmic, like footsteps of something impossibly large moving below. With each tremor, more creatures emerged from hidden places, things we had no names for, no frame of reference to understand. Harrison Black made the final discovery before everything changed. In the deepest accessible part of the mountain, he found a chamber with walls of what looked like organic metal, pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. At its center was a cocoon or egg, 60 feet tall, with something moving inside. Around it were the creatures, all of them kneeling or bowing or showing deference in whatever way their anatomies allowed. It's not a mountain, Harrison gasped over the radio. It's a prison, and we've been living on top of it, bleeding on it, dying on it, feeding it for generations. The creatures aren't invading. They're preparing for something's release. The temperature has dropped 40 degrees. Snow falls upward in some places. Radio transmissions are replaced by screaming in dead languages. The compass points to the mountain regardless of actual direction. Last night we heard it, a sound from inside the mountain that was felt more than heard, a roar that made reality ripple. The giants have abandoned their careful distance and now stand as sentries around our stations, not threatening but protecting, as if even they fear what's coming. The dogmen howl constantly, now not in hunt but in terror. The Wendigo have retreated to the deepest caves, their hunger replaced by fear. And in the sky, things with too many wings circle, waiting. I'm transmitting this to every frequency, uploading to every server, sending to every contact. The Park Service wants to nuclear strike the mountain, but we think that might be what it wants, the energy to complete its awakening. If you're reading this, stay away from the Cascade National Forest. Don't come looking for us. Don't try to help. The convergence isn't just happening here. Check your forests, your mountains, your wild places. The creatures have always been there, holding something back. And now, God help us all, they're failing. The mountain just cracked. Light that shouldn't exist pours from the fissure. The creatures are running, all of them, predator and prey alike, fleeing together. Something's coming out. Something that makes all our monsters look like guardians. Something that's been sleeping since before human history. Something that's finally terribly awake. My name is Matthew, and I've been a park ranger for the National Forest Service for 12 years. I've worked in 3 different states, seen bear attacks, pulled bodies from rivers, and watched hypothermia turn grown men into confused children. I thought I'd seen everything the wilderness could throw at a person. I was wrong. The transfer to the Hiawatha National Forest in Michigan's Upper Peninsula came through in late October. My supervisor, Ranger Thomas Grayson, made the call himself instead of sending the usual email. That should have been my first warning. Matthew, we need someone with experience up at Station 47, Thomas said, his voice carrying that careful neutrality supervisors use when they're about to tell you something unpleasant. The last 3 rangers requested transfers within 6 months. We need someone who won't spook easily. What's the problem? Bears? Not exactly. He paused, and I heard papers shuffling. There have been incidents. Missing hikers. Strange reports. The local ranger, Ezra Blackwood, he's been up there alone for 2 months. He needs backup. I should have asked more questions. I should have demanded details. Instead, I packed my truck and drove north, watching the trees grow denser and the gas stations grow scarcer until I was deep in the kind of wilderness that makes people remember why their ancestors feared the dark. Station 47 sat at the end of a logging road that hadn't seen maintenance in years. The cabin was solid timber built in the 1960s when the Forest Service still constructed buildings meant to last. Solar panels on the roof, a radio tower bristling with antennas, and bars on the windows, bars, on a ranger station. Ezra met me on the porch. He was perhaps 60, weathered like driftwood, with the kind of eyes that tracked everything without seeming to move. He didn't offer his hand. You're Matthew. It wasn't a question. That's right. Ranger Thomas said you needed. Come inside. We don't talk about certain things outside. Not after dark. It was 4 in the afternoon. I followed him in any way. The interior was immaculate. Maps covered one wall, stuck with colored pins that clustered in specific areas. Red pins, lots of them. A gun rack held not just the standard Forest Service rifle but 3 more weapons, including a shotgun I recognized as loaded with slugs, heavy enough to drop a grizzly. Ezra poured coffee from a pot that smelled like it had been brewing since morning. Read your file. Yellowstone, Olympic, Smoky Mountains. Good experience. You ever hear things you couldn't explain? Sure. Wind in the pines sounds like voices. Elk bugling sounds like screaming. Every ranger. That's not what I mean. He set a mug in front of me. I mean things that make you check your ammunition. Things that make you understand why every culture that ever lived in deep forest had monsters in their stories. I sipped the coffee to buy time. It was terrible. Ranger Thomas said there were incidents. 17 missing persons in the last 3 years. Ezra pointed at the red pins. Hikers, hunters, 2 other rangers. We find their camps sometimes. Tents torn open from the outside. Food untouched. No sign of bear or wolf, just gone. That's a lot of people. That's just the ones we know about. This forest covers 750,000 acres. You could lose an army in there. He moved to the map, his finger tracing the clusters of pins. They congregate in 3 areas. Here, near Carp River. Here in the northeast section near Lake Superior. And here. His finger stopped at the densest cluster. The desolation. I don't see that on any map. It's not official. Old logger's name. 20,000 acres of virgin timber. Never been cut. The trees there are 300 years old. The Ojibwe won't go in there. They say it's where the Wendigo hunts. I must have smiled because Ezra's face hardened. You think that's folklore? You think some old Indian legend doesn't mean anything? He pulled up his sleeve. 4 parallel scars ran from his elbow to his wrist, the kind of scars that come from claws. I thought that too. 17 years ago, when I was young and stupid like you. I went into the desolation alone, tracking a lost hunter. Found him too. What was left of him. What happened? You'll find out. This forest has a way of teaching lessons to those who don't believe. He let his sleeve drop. We patrol in pairs, always. We don't go out after sunset unless it's an emergency. We don't investigate sounds in the woods at night, and we never ever go into the desolation without at least 4 armed men. You're saying something killed those people. I'm saying something is killing them, present tense, and it's getting bolder. He pulled a notebook from his desk, flipped it open. 2 weeks ago, hikers at Carp River Campground reported seeing a figure watching their camp from the tree line, 7 feet tall, thin, standing completely still for over an hour. When they shined a light on it, it moved away. Wrong, they said. It moved wrong. Could have been someone on stilts, a prank. That's what the police said, right up until they found the tracks. He slid a photograph across the table. They're calling it a hoax. The photo showed a footprint in mud next to a ruler for scale. It was roughly human-shaped but elongated, nearly 20 inches long, with toes that ended in what looked like claws. The depth of the print suggested something very heavy, but it was the stride length that made my mouth go dry. The next print was visible at the edge of the frame, 8 feet away. What makes tracks like that? You tell me. Ezra closed the notebook. You'll be taking the day shifts for the first week. I'll take nights. After that, we'll rotate. There's a sat phone on the desk. Regular radio doesn't work in the deep forest. If you get in trouble, call. I'll come. And if you get in trouble? He looked at me with something that might have been pity. Then you make sure the door is locked and you wait until dawn. That first night, I lay in my bunk and listened to the forest. The cabin had thick walls, double-paned windows, but sound carries in the wilderness. I heard the usual, wind, the distant call of an owl, branches creaking. Normal sounds. Then, around 2 in the morning, I heard the howling. It started distant, somewhere deep in the trees. Not wolves, I knew wolf howls, had heard them hundreds of times. This was different. Higher pitched, almost human. It rose and fell in a pattern that sounded intentional, like a language, like words. I went to the window. Ezra was already there, standing in the dark, watching the tree line with a rifle in his hands. What is that? Locals call them the dogmen, he said without turning. Because they're not quite wolf and not quite man. You'll see them soon enough. They run in packs sometimes. Usually keep their distance, but they're curious. They like to test boundaries. You're telling me there are werewolves out there. I'm telling you there are things out there that match descriptions people have been giving for centuries. Whether you want to call them werewolves or dogmen or something else doesn't matter. What matters is they're real, they're dangerous, and they're just one of the problems we have. The howling continued for another 10 minutes, moving in a rough circle around the station. Then it stopped, cut off mid-cry, and the silence that followed was somehow worse. They're gone, Ezra said. Something bigger scared them off. What's bigger than? A sound cut through the night. A scream. Not animal, not quite human. It started low and rose to a shriek that made every hair on my body stand up. It came from the direction of the desolation, miles away, but it carried across the forest with impossible clarity. Ezra's knuckles were white on the rifle. That's the Wendigo. It's hunting. I wanted to tell him he was crazy. I wanted to laugh, to rationalize, to explain it all away as wind or elk or acoustic tricks. But something ancient in my brain, something that remembered when humans were prey, was screaming at me to run. Instead, I stood at the window with Ezra and watched the forest until dawn broke over the trees. Morning came with frost on the ground and my breath steaming in the air. I hadn't slept after the howling stopped. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that scream, the one Ezra called the Wendigo, echoing through my skull. Ezra was already up, cooking eggs on the propane stove. He looked like he'd slept fine, but I noticed the rifle was still leaning against the wall beside him, within easy reach. Coffee's fresh, he said. Eat up, we have a long day. Our first patrol took us along the southern boundary, checking trail markers and campsites. The forest was beautiful in the daylight. Autumn had painted the maples and birches in shades of red and gold, and the morning sun filtered through the canopy in golden shafts. It was easy to forget in that light what I'd heard in the darkness. We were 3 hours in when Ezra suddenly stopped, hand raised. I froze. You see it? He whispered. See what? The trees. Look at the tree trunks. I looked. At first I saw nothing unusual. Then my eyes adjusted, and I understood. Claw marks, deep gouges in the bark, running in parallel lines from about 7 feet high down to the ground. They were on multiple trees, spaced about 15 feet apart, forming a rough line through the forest. What did this? I asked, though part of me already knew I didn't want the answer. Territorial marking, like a bear does, but bigger, higher. Ezra knelt by one of the trees, running his fingers along the gouges, fresh, within the last day or two. Bears stand on their hind legs to mark. These marks are at least 7 feet high at their apex. Show me a bear that stands 9 feet tall. I couldn't. We both knew I couldn't. We followed the marked trees for another half-mile. The marks grew more violent, deeper, bark shredded away in chunks. And then we found the deer. It had been a big buck, 8 points. Now it hung in the branches of a massive oak, 12 feet off the ground, draped over a thick limb like someone had tossed it there. Its body was broken, ribs showing through torn hide, legs bent at impossible angles, but its head was intact, and its eyes were still open, filmed over with death but somehow still conveying an expression of absolute terror. Jesus Christ, I breathed. Ezra was already backing away. We need to leave. Now. Shouldn't we document this? Take photos for Matthew. We need to leave now. The fear in his voice got through to me. We moved fast, not quite running but close, retracing our steps back toward the trail. My skin crawled with the sensation of being watched, and I kept fighting the urge to look over my shoulder. We were almost back to the main path when I heard it, heavy footsteps behind us. Not quite in rhythm, the gait slightly off, like someone walking on legs that were built wrong. They were getting closer. Don't run, Ezra said quietly. Don't look back, just keep walking. The footsteps kept pace with us, staying perhaps 50 yards back, just out of sight in the dense undergrowth. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get away. But Ezra's hand on my shoulder kept me moving at that steady, measured pace. The footsteps followed us for 20 minutes. Then, as we emerged onto the main trail where the forest opened up, they stopped. We didn't speak until we were back at the truck. What was that? I asked. One of the dogmen. They hunt in packs, but scouts move alone. It was checking us out, seeing if we were weak, if we were worth attacking. He unlocked the truck, and I noticed his hands were shaking slightly. We passed the test, this time. We drove back to the station in silence. I kept checking the side mirror, half expecting to see something loping along behind us. That afternoon, I made the mistake of asking Ezra about the other rangers, the ones who'd requested transfers. Carter made it 2 months, he said. Good kid, fresh out of training. Started having nightmares. Then he started seeing things during the day. Shadows moving between the trees, shapes watching the cabin. He called me one night, 3 in the morning, swearing something was trying to get in through the roof. When I got there, he was barricaded in his room with every piece of furniture stacked against the door. Was there something on the roof? No. But there were tracks all around the cabin. The 20-inch prints, going in circles, around and around, like whatever made them was looking for a way in. He poured himself more coffee. Carter transferred to a station in Kansas. Prairies. He said he never wanted to see a tree again. And the others? Isaac lasted 3 weeks. He was older, experienced, thought he'd seen it all. Then he went out on a solo patrol and came back different. Wouldn't talk about what he saw. Just packed his things and left. Ezra's face darkened. Jaden didn't request a transfer. We found his truck at the edge of the desolation. Engine running, door open. His radio was on the seat. His backpack was still in the cab. No sign of struggle. He just walked into those trees and never came out. When was this? 4 months ago. We had search teams out for 3 weeks. Dogs, helicopters, volunteers, nothing. It's like the forest swallowed him. He met my eyes. That's when Thomas decided we needed 2 rangers here at all times. No one goes out alone anymore. No exceptions. I wanted to ask more questions, but a call came through on the radio. Hikers at one of the northern campsites reporting strange noises the previous night. Ezra told them to pack up and move to a different site, closer to the main road. They argued. He got firm, used his authority. They finally agreed. You do that a lot? I asked after he hung up. Move people out of certain areas? Every week. We tell them bear activity, trail maintenance, whatever gets them to move. Can't tell them the truth. Who'd believe it? He had a point. I barely believed it, and I'd heard the howling myself. That evening, Ezra pulled out a map and spread it on the table. It was hand-drawn, far more detailed than the official Forest Service maps. It showed trails I'd never seen on any official documentation, along with symbols and notations in the margins. This is the real map, he said. 20 years of rangers before me documented this, where the attacks happen, where the sightings cluster, safe routes and danger zones. The map was covered in symbols. Red X's marked attack sites. Black circles indicated sightings. And throughout the desolation, the central section was marked with dozens of small skulls. What do the skulls mean? Bodies we've found, or what was left of them. His finger traced the northern edge of the desolation. This area here is the worst. 3 recovered bodies in the last 5 years, all in the same general location, all killed the same way. What way? Ezra pulled out a file folder, hesitated, then opened it. The crime scene photos were brutal. I'd seen death before, drownings, falls, animal attacks, but these were different. The bodies were emaciated, skin stretched tight over bones as if they'd starved to death. But they'd been killed recently, according to the reports. Killed and partially eaten. The Ojibwe have stories about the Wendigo going back centuries, Ezra said. It's not just a monster, it's a spirit of hunger, of consumption. The stories say it was once human, driven to cannibalism during a terrible winter, and transformed into something that can never be satisfied. Always hungry, always hunting. You think something like that is real? I think something that matches those descriptions is out there, and it's killed at least a dozen people that we know of, maybe more. He closed the folder. The old rangers, the ones who were here in the 50s and 60s, they had a rule, never go into the desolation, ever, for any reason. Then in the 90s, new management came in, said that was superstitious nonsense. They sent rangers in to catalog the old-growth timber. What happened? 3 rangers went in, 2 came out. They were babbling, incoherent. One of them, Gabriel Torres, he never recovered, still in a psychiatric facility downstate. The other, Luca Brennan, he killed himself 6 months later. Jumped off a bridge in Minneapolis. And the third? Never found him. Christopher Vance, 26 years old, wife and a kid, just gone. Ezra rolled up the map. After that, they reinstated the rule. The desolation is off limits to all personnel. We mark it as hazardous terrain on the public maps, put up signs about cliff danger and unstable ground. All bullshit, but it keeps most people out. Most. Every year, someone ignores the signs. Hunters mostly. Young men who think they're tough, who want to prove themselves. Some of them come out, some don't. That night, I took first watch. Ezra showed me how to use the night vision scope, how to sweep the tree line methodically, watching for movement. The forest was alive with small movements. Raccoons, possums, owls hunting, normal animals, living normal lives. Then around 11 I saw them. They emerged from the trees about 200 yards out, at the edge of the range where the night vision could still pick up details. There were 4 of them, moving in a loose formation. They walked upright, but their posture was wrong. Shoulders too far forward, heads too large. Even at that distance I could see they were covered in dark hair or fur. The dogmen. They paced along the tree line, never coming closer but never leaving, watching, studying. One of them, the largest, rose up onto its hind legs, fully upright. It stood at least 7 feet tall. It turned its head toward the cabin, and even through the night vision scope I could see the reflection of its eyes. I must have made a sound, because Ezra appeared beside me. He looked through the scope, grunted. Pack is bigger than last week. They're gathering. Gathering for what? Winter's coming. Food gets scarce. They get bolder. He lowered the scope. They're smart, Matthew. Smart enough to test defenses, to probe for weakness. They've learned that humans are dangerous at a distance but weak up close. They've learned to be patient. The dogmen stayed at the tree line for 2 more hours. Then as midnight approached, they melted back into the forest, one by one, until we were alone again. I didn't sleep that night either. The call came through at dawn. 2 hunters, Miles Carver and Jackson Reed, had failed to check in at their base camp. Their friends Isaiah Porter and Andrew Walsh had gone looking for them at first light and found their tent collapsed. Gear scattered, no sign of their bodies. Ezra grabbed the sat phone. Where exactly? Northeast section near the old logging camp, about 3 miles from the desolation boundary. The voice on the other end belonged to Joshua Kim, the county sheriff. I've got deputies heading up there, but your station is closer. Can you do initial assessment? We'll go. Ezra hung up, looked at me. Get your gear. Full pack, extra ammunition, flares, and bring the good camera. 30 minutes later, we were hiking through the pre-dawn darkness. Headlamps cutting tunnels through the black. The trail was rough, overgrown in places. This far out, maintenance was sporadic at best. We found the camp just as the sun was breaking over the ridge. It looked like a bomb had gone off. The tent was shredded, nylon fabric hanging in strips from bent poles. A cooler had been torn open, food scattered but not eaten. 2 backpacks had been ripped apart, contents strewn across the ground. Sleeping bags were in tatters. But there was no blood, no bodies, no sign of the hunters except for their belongings. Ezra photographed everything while I examined the perimeter. The ground was soft from recent rain, perfect for prints. I found them almost immediately. The 20-inch tracks, dozens of them, circling the camp. But there was another set too. Smaller, more human-sized, but the stride was all wrong, too long, and the toes had claws. Ezra, you need to see this. He came over, looked at the prints, and his face went gray. That's not Dogman tracks. I know. Those are Wendigo prints. It came right into the camp. We followed the tracks. They led east toward the desolation, the prints spaced 10 feet apart, as if whatever made them had been running or bounding, clearing distance with each step. About 100 yards from the camp, we found the first sign of blood. It was on a tree trunk, about chest height. Just a smear, dark and already dried. Then another tree, another smear. A trail. They're alive, I said. Or they were. The Wendigo is hurting them. Or chasing them. Ezra checked his GPS. We're half a mile from the boundary. If they crossed into the desolation, we have to go after them. Matthew, we can't. The rule is, fuck the rule. There are 2 people out there who might still be alive. And if we go in there, we might not come back out. Then there are 4 dead instead of 2. But even as he said it, I could see the conflict in his eyes. He knew I was right. We had to try. The decision was taken out of our hands when we heard the scream. It came from deep in the forest, high-pitched and ragged with terror. A man's voice, screaming words I couldn't make out. Then it cut off abruptly. We ran. The forest grew darker as we moved deeper. The trees here were ancient, their canopy so thick it blocked out most of the sun. The undergrowth was sparse. Not enough light reached the ground for much to grow. It was like running through a cathedral, columns of wood stretching up into green darkness. The tracks were easy to follow. The Wendigo wasn't trying to hide its trail. Why would it? This was its territory. These were its woods. We'd gone maybe a mile when I saw the first body. Miles Carver was hanging from a low branch, about 8 feet off the ground. His body was intact, but his face was frozen in an expression of such pure horror that I had to look away. His eyes were open, bulging from their sockets. His mouth was stretched wide in a scream that had died with him. Don't touch him, Ezra said. It's a lure. The Wendigo leaves bodies where they'll be found. It wants us to stop, to investigate, to let our guard down. We can't just leave him. We can, and we will. Jackson might still be alive. That's our priority. We moved on, and the forest grew colder. My breath steamed in the air, though it was only October and not below freezing. The temperature was dropping unnaturally, as if something was sucking the warmth from the air. Then I heard it breathing, harsh, ragged, coming from somewhere ahead. We found Jackson Reed hiding in a hollow beneath a fallen tree. He was curled into a ball, shaking violently, his hands pressed over his ears. His pants were dark with urine, and when he saw us, he screamed. It's okay, we're rangers. We're here to help. I reached for him, but he scrambled backward, eyes wild. No, don't, it'll hear you, it'll come back. Jackson, we need to get you out of here. Can you walk? Miles, he sobbed. It took Miles, it reached down and grabbed him, and he was screaming, and I ran. God help me, I ran. Ezra grabbed his shoulders. Jackson, look at me. Look at me. Where is it now? I don't know, it was following me. I could hear it in the trees. It sounds like branches breaking, but it's not branches, it's bones. Its joints crack when it moves. Everything about it is wrong. Which direction? Jackson pointed deeper into the desolation. It went that way, but it'll come back. They always come back. It's still hungry. It's always hungry. We got him to his feet. He could barely walk, his legs shaking so badly he had to lean on both of us. We started back the way we'd come, moving as quickly as we could while half carrying him. We'd made it maybe 200 yards when I heard the sound Jackson had described, a wet crack, like green wood splintering coming from somewhere behind us. Then another, and another, rhythmic, getting closer. Faster, Ezra hissed. We picked up the pace, practically dragging Jackson now. The cracking sounds followed, steady and patient, not rushing, not worried. It knew these woods. It knew we couldn't escape. The temperature dropped further. My hands were numb, my face burning with cold. I could see frost forming on the trees around us, ice crystals growing on the bark in real time. With each crack behind us, the cold intensified. There, Ezra pointed ahead. The boundary marker, the edge of the desolation. 50 more yards. The cracking stopped. In the sudden silence, I could hear something else, breathing. Not Jackson's panic gasps or our own labored breaths. Slower, deeper. The sound of lungs the size of industrial bellows drawing in air. I made the mistake of looking back. It was standing about 30 yards away, partially hidden behind a tree that was far too small to conceal it. For a moment, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It was tall, 9 feet, maybe more. Impossibly thin, as if something had taken a human frame and stretched it like taffy. Its limbs were too long, joints in places they shouldn't be. The skin was gray-white, pulled tight over bones that pressed against it from within. But it was the face that froze me in place. It looked human, almost. The basic features were there. Eyes, nose, mouth, but the proportions were wrong. The mouth too wide, splitting the face almost ear to ear. The eyes were yellow, with pupils that were too large, too dark. And the antlers. Massive elk antlers sprouted from its skull, 12 points at least, decorated with strips of cloth and what might have been human hair. It was watching us with what looked like curiosity. Its head tilted slightly to one side, the way a dog might examine something it found interesting. "Don't move," Ezra whispered. "Don't even breathe." The Wendigo took a step toward us. That's when I understood what Jackson had meant about the sounds. When it moved, its joints bent in ways that defied anatomy, producing that wet cracking sound. It was the sound of a body that had been broken and healed wrong, over and over, until nothing about it worked the way it should. It took another step, then another, moving slowly, deliberately, savoring our fear. Ezra's hand moved slowly to his rifle. On my signal, "Run for the boundary. Don't look back. Don't stop." "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you. Now go." We ran. Behind us the Wendigo shrieked, that same sound I'd heard from the cabin, but 1,000 times worse up close. It vibrated in my bones, made my teeth ache, filled my head with visions of cold and hunger and endless winter. The cracking sounds came faster now, the thing closing distance with horrifying speed. I could hear its breath, smell the rot of its body like spoiled meat and freezer burn. Jackson was screaming, legs pumping in pure animal terror. A gunshot cracked through the forest, then another. Ezra buying us time. The boundary marker flashed past. We crossed into normal forest, and the temperature immediately began to rise. The frost on the trees was already melting, water dripping like tears. More gunshots. Then Ezra was beside us, his face white, reloading as he ran. "Did you hit it?" 3 times. Center mass. Didn't even slow it down. We didn't stop running until we reached the truck. We threw Jackson in the back seat, and Ezra drove like the devil himself was chasing us. Maybe he was. Back at the station, we called the sheriff. Ezra told him we'd found 1 survivor, 1 confirmed dead, couldn't recover the body, too dangerous. He didn't mention what we'd seen, what words could describe it. The paramedics took Jackson away. He was still mumbling about hunger and cold and things that crack like bones. They said it was shock. I didn't correct them. That night, Ezra and I sat in the cabin with every light on, weapons loaded, watching the forest. "It let us go," I said finally. "It could have caught us, but it didn't." "I know."
Why?
Ezra was quiet for a long time, because it wasn't hungry enough. Not yet. Winter's still weeks away. But when the real cold comes, when food gets scarce, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Outside, in the darkness, something howled. The dogmen were back, circling the station, and somewhere deeper in the forest, from the direction of the desolation, came an answering call. The Wendigo claiming its territory. We didn't sleep that night. I'm not sure we ever would again. The next week passed in a blur of patrols, reports, and the kind of exhaustion that comes from never truly resting. Every night brought new sounds from the forest. Every day brought more signs that something was wrong. More tracks appeared around the station, not just the Wendigo's massive prints, but dozens of the smaller dogman tracks. They were growing bolder, coming closer. One morning I found prints on the hood of my truck. Something had climbed up there during the night and sat, watching the cabin. Sheriff Kim called on the 5th day. "We need to talk about closing the forest. This is the 3rd incident in as many weeks. The county commissioner is asking questions." "Close it," Ezra said immediately. "Tell them forest fire danger. Tell them trail maintenance. I don't care, just get people out. What's really going on up there?" "You don't want to know, Joshua. Trust me on this." The sheriff was quiet for a moment. "The doctors say Jackson Reed isn't improving. He's catatonic. Won't eat, won't speak. They found frostbite on his fingers and toes, but the weather reports show it was 60 degrees that day. Psychological trauma can..." "Matthew, I've known you for exactly 1 week, but I've known Ezra for 15 years. He's never lied to me. I'm asking, what did you see in those woods?" I looked at Ezra. He shook his head slightly, but I ignored him. Something that matches descriptions people have been giving for centuries. Something that shouldn't exist but does. And it's getting more active. Jesus Christ. Close the forest, Joshua, please. He agreed. By evening, every access road had a gate. Every trail had a closure sign. The official reason was hazardous wildlife activity. Not quite a lie. But closing the forest didn't stop what was already inside. That night, the dogmen came in force. I was on watch, scanning the tree line with the night vision scope when they emerged. Dozens of them, moving through the trees in a coordinated formation, more than I'd ever seen. They surrounded the station in a loose circle, staying just at the edge of effective rifle range. Ezra, I called. We've got a problem. He was beside me in seconds. When he saw them, he swore viciously. They're hunting. This is a hunting formation. Hunting what? Us. As if they'd heard him, the circle began to tighten. The dogmen moved closer, their movements eerily synchronized. In the green glow of the night vision, I could see them more clearly than ever before. Their faces were a nightmarish blend of canine and human features, elongated snouts filled with too many teeth, but with human-like eyes that showed intelligence and purpose. Their bodies were muscular, covered in thick fur, hands that ended in claws but had opposable thumbs. Warning shots, Ezra said. Fire into the air. We both fired, the shots echoing across the forest. The dogmen stopped, but they didn't retreat. Instead, several of them rose onto their hind legs, standing fully upright. The largest, the same one I'd seen before, threw back its head and howled. The others joined in, creating a chorus that made my blood run cold. Then they charged. Fire, Ezra screamed. I emptied the rifle's magazine into the mass of bodies rushing toward us. Some of them went down, but others just kept coming. They moved fast, faster than anything that size should move. The first wave hit the fence that surrounded the station compound, and the chain link buckled under their weight. Ezra switched to the shotgun, firing slugs point blank as the fence gave way. 3 dogmen went down, bodies torn apart by the heavy ammunition, but there were so many more. They swarmed over the fence like water, their claws finding purchase on the metal links. I fell back to the cabin door, still firing, brass casings raining around my feet. Ezra was beside me, his face splattered with blood from something he'd shot at close range. We made it inside, slammed the door, through the heavy bolt. Immediately, bodies hit the door from outside. The wood groaned but held. The windows, thank God for those bars, filled with snarling faces. Claws scraped against glass. The entire cabin shook with the force of their assault. The roof, Ezra shouted. They'll try the roof. We heard them up there, scrambling across the metal panels. Claws screeched against aluminum. Then came the sound of ripping metal as they found the edge of one panel and started tearing it away. The attic, I pointed up. We need to... A claw punched through the ceiling, gouging through drywall like paper. Then another. They were coming through. Ezra grabbed the shotgun, aimed up, and fired. Once. Twice. Something screamed above us and blood dripped through the holes in the ceiling. The claws withdrew. For a moment there was silence. Then the assault on the doors and windows intensified. They were trying every entrance, testing every barrier. Methodical, intelligent. They're going to get in, I said. I know. Ezra was reloading, his hands steady despite the chaos. When they do, aim for the head. Nothing else puts them down reliably. The door was cracking. The wood around the bolt was splintering. We had maybe a minute, maybe less. Then the assault stopped. Just like that. Silence. Through the windows, I could see the dogmen retreating, backing away from the cabin. They weren't running, they were moving deliberately, watching something behind them, watching the forest.
What are they?
I started to ask. The Wendigo emerged from the trees. Even the dogmen feared it. They scattered as it approached, clearing a path. It walked right up to the cabin, ducking to peer through one of the barred windows with those terrible yellow eyes. This close, I could see every detail of its nightmarish form. The way its skin was stretched so tight it had split in places, revealing gray flesh beneath. The way its fingers were too long, with too many joints. The antlers massive and crowned with frost that shouldn't exist in October. It looked at me, into me, and I felt a cold that had nothing to do with temperature. It was the cold of deep space, of absolute zero, of death. I felt my thoughts slowing, my body forgetting how to generate warmth. I saw visions of endless winter, of hunger that consumed everything, of the terrible simplicity of tooth and claw and meat. Ezra grabbed my shoulder, shook me. Matthew, don't look at it, don't let it in. I tore my gaze away. The Wendigo stayed at the window for another moment, then turned and walked back into the forest. The dogmen followed, their formation broken, their hunt abandoned. Within minutes they were all gone, swallowed by the darkness. We stood in the ruined cabin, surrounded by destruction, and tried to process what had just happened. Why did they leave? I asked. The Wendigo called them off. This is its territory. They hunt here by its permission. Ezra leaned against the wall, suddenly looking every one of his 60 years. It was sending us a message. You're alive because it allows it, for now. We can't stay here. No, we can't. He pulled out his sat phone, started to dial. I'm calling Thomas. We need backup. The phone went dead. No signal. I checked mine. Same thing. They took out the radio tower, Ezra said, moving to the window. Look. The antenna array on the roof was gone, torn away completely. We were cut off. We could drive out, I suggested. Get to town, get help, and leave the station unattended. This is the only permanent human presence for 50 miles. If we abandon it, they'll know humans have ceded this territory. The attacks will spread. More hikers, more hunters, more deaths. So what do we do? Ezra looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. We survive until dawn. Then we figure out what comes next. We spent the rest of the night fortifying the cabin, boarding up windows, reinforcing the door. We moved all the ammunition into the main room, set up firing positions, prepared for another assault. It never came, but that was almost worse. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional distant howl. They were out there, watching, waiting, and we both knew this wasn't over. Dawn came eventually, the way it always does. The first light revealed the carnage around the cabin. Blood splattered across the ground, chunks of fur and flesh where our shots had found targets. The fence was destroyed, twisted metal hanging in strips. The door was splintered, held together more by the bolt than by the wood itself. We need to get that radio tower fixed, I said. Can't. We'd be exposed, vulnerable. They'd pick us off before we got halfway through the repairs. Then we need to get out. Drive to town, call for backup, come back with a team. Ezra was quiet for a long moment, then checked the truck. I went outside, rifle ready, scanning the tree line. The truck looked intact from a distance. But when I got closer, I saw what Ezra had already known I would find. The tires were shredded, all 4 of them, torn to pieces. The hood was crumpled where something heavy had stood on it. And when I looked inside, I saw that every wire had been pulled out, the entire engine compartment gutted. They'd made sure we couldn't leave. We were trapped. 3 more days passed. 3 days of rationing food and water, of taking turns on watch, of waiting for another attack that never came. The forest remained silent, too silent. No birds sang, no squirrels chattered. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. On the 4th morning, we found the sign. It was driven into the ground 20 feet from the cabin, a stripped sapling sharpened to a point and planted firmly in the earth. Hanging from it were bones, ribs, femurs, skulls. Some were animal, some were not. They'd been arranged in a pattern, a message written in the language of death. It's a warning, Ezra said, or a challenge. Hard to tell the difference. That afternoon, we saw the smoke. It rose from somewhere deep in the desolation, a thick column of black that suggested a large fire, but there was nothing out there to burn. No cabins, no camps, nothing. Just empty forest. It's calling us, Ezra said. The Wendigo. It wants us to come to it. That's insane. Why would we? Because it's going to keep killing until we do. Because this is its territory, and we're trespassing, and the only way it ends is if we acknowledge that or we make it end. He looked at me. I know what I'm suggesting. I know how it sounds. But I've been here 17 years, Matthew. I've watched this thing kill dozens of people. I've seen it grow bolder every year. If we don't stop it now, more people will die. Stop it how? We shot it 3 times and it didn't even slow down. Because we didn't know what we were dealing with. He pulled out a battered notebook, different from the one before, older, the cover stained and worn. This belonged to the ranger before me, Nathan Cross. He spent 30 years studying the Wendigo, obsessed with it. Most people thought he was crazy, but he documented everything, traditional knowledge from the Ojibwe, folklore from loggers, his own observations. He opened the notebook. The pages were filled with cramped handwriting, sketches, diagrams, notes in the margins in different colored ink, annotations stacked on annotations. The Wendigo is a spirit, Ezra read, but it's bound to a physical form. That form can be destroyed, but only in certain ways. Fire won't work, it's a creature of cold. Bullets won't work unless they're blessed, but iron will. Cold iron, the old stories say. Pure metal, never heated. Where are we supposed to get cold iron? Nathan prepared for this. There's a cache, hidden in the desolation. Iron stakes, spikes, blades. Enough to kill it, if we can get close enough. He closed the notebook. I never thought I'd have the courage to try. But after the other night, we can't wait anymore. It's only going to get worse. I looked at the smoke rising in the distance. Every instinct I had screamed at me to refuse, to find another way, to run. But Ezra was right. How many more Miles and Jacksons would die if we did nothing? When do we go? Tomorrow. At first light. We'll need a clear day. Good visibility. And we'll need to be fast. He handed me the notebook. Read this tonight. Learn everything you can. If something happens to me, if I don't make it back, you need to know how to finish this. That night, I read Nathan Cross's notebook cover to cover. The early entries were clinical, almost scientific, recording sightings, measurements, behavior patterns. But as the years passed, the entries grew darker. Nathan had lost friends, colleagues, people he'd failed to save. The Wendigo wasn't just an animal to him. It was evil personified, the manifestation of humanity's worst impulses given form and set loose in the world. The final entry was dated 3 days before Nathan's death. He'd had a heart attack, died at his desk in this very cabin. It read, 28 years I've watched it hunt. 28 years of failure. But I understand now. The Wendigo isn't just a monster. It's a test, a mirror held up to humanity, showing us what we become when we surrender to our basest instincts. To kill it, you must resist what it represents. You must choose compassion over consumption, generosity over greed, warmth over cold. You must remember what it means to be human, even when faced with the inhuman. The cache is at the heart of the desolation, in the hollow beneath the Old King, the largest hemlock in the forest. You'll know it when you see it. The iron is there, use it well, and if you fail, at least you'll die knowing you tried to stop the hunger. Dawn came cold and gray. We packed light, just weapons, water, and the map Nathan had drawn. The route he'd marked took us straight into the heart of the desolation, a 6-mile hike through the densest part of the forest. We left at sunrise. The forest was silent as we entered the desolation, the temperature dropping with each step. Frost covered the trees despite the October weather, and our breath steamed in the frigid air. We'd hiked for 2 hours when we found the first bodies. There were 7 of them, scattered through a clearing like broken dolls. All were emaciated, skin tight over bones. All wore expressions of absolute terror. Some were recent, still relatively intact. Others were older, partially skeletal, and one was fresh enough that I recognized the uniform. Jaden, Ezra whispered, the ranger who disappeared. We didn't stop to bury them. There wasn't time. The Old King revealed itself slowly, growing larger and larger as we approached until it dominated the horizon. It was massive, 20 feet in diameter, rising 300 feet into the air, its crown lost in the canopy above. The bark was scarred with age, marked with symbols I didn't recognize. At its base, partially hidden by roots, was a hollow. Nathan's cache was exactly where he'd said it would be. The wooden box had been there for years, but the contents were pristine. Iron spikes, each about a foot long and wickedly sharp. Iron blades, edges honed to razor sharpness. And a single wooden stake with an iron core, carved with symbols that might have been words or might have been prayers. We took what we could carry. The iron was heavy, far heavier than regular steel. It seemed to pull at us, wanting to return to the earth. Now what? I asked. Now we wait. It knows we're here. It'll come. We didn't have to wait long. The temperature plummeted. The frost on the trees thickened, ice crystals growing with visible speed. And from the darkness between the ancient trees, it emerged. The Wendigo was even more horrible in daylight. Every detail was visible, the translucent skin, the bones pressing through from within, the antlers massive and terrible. It moved with that terrible cracking sound, each step an agony to watch. But what struck me most were its eyes. They weren't animal eyes. They held intelligence, awareness, and beneath that something that might once have been human. It stopped 50 feet away, regarding us. When it spoke, its voice was like winter wind through dead trees, somehow forming words. Flee or feed. Nathan sent us. Ezra called back. We know what you are. We know how to stop you. The Wendigo's mouth split wider, impossibly wide, revealing rows of teeth like broken glass. Was it smiling? Many have tried. All have fed the hunger. Then we'll be the first to succeed. It came for us in a burst of speed that shouldn't have been possible. One moment it was standing still. The next it was nearly on top of us, claws reaching, that terrible mouth gaping. Ezra swung the iron blade, caught it across the chest. The Wendigo shrieked, a sound that made blood run from my ears. Where the iron touched, its flesh blackened and smoked. It recoiled, staggering back. It works, Ezra shouted. The iron works. But the wound was already healing, flesh knitting back together with horrible speed. We'd heard it, but not enough, not nearly enough. It circled us, moving between the trees with fluid grace, testing, probing, looking for weakness. I grabbed an iron spike, hefted it like a spear. When the Wendigo darted in again, I threw. The spike struck it in the shoulder, punched clean through. It shrieked again, clawing at the iron, unable to dislodge it. The heart, Ezra yelled. Nathan's notes said it has to be the heart. The Wendigo was enraged now, attacking with abandon. Its claws raked across Ezra's arm, tearing through his jacket and into flesh. He fell back, blood streaming. I swung another blade, caught the creature across its legs. It stumbled, went down on one knee. This was our chance. Maybe our only chance. I grabbed the wooden stake with the iron core, Nathan's final weapon. The carvings on it seemed to glow, or maybe that was just my imagination. The Wendigo looked up at me, and for a moment I saw something in its eyes that might have been fear, or relief. Finish it, Ezra gasped. End the hunger. I drove the stake into its chest with both hands, pushing with all my strength. The Wendigo's mouth opened wide, but no sound came out. The cold intensified to unbearable levels, and for a moment I was somewhere else, a winter night centuries ago, a desperate man making a terrible choice, the taste of human flesh and the horror of what he'd become. Then the stake punched through its heart, and the Wendigo exploded into frost. The cold vanished instantly, the ice on the trees melted, running in streams, and where the Wendigo had been there was only a pile of bones, human bones, ancient and yellowed with age. The antlers clattered to the ground, suddenly just dead bone, nothing more. We stood in silence, breathing hard. It was over. It was actually over. Is it dead? I asked. Ezra looked at the bones, then at the forest around us. Already it felt different, warmer. The oppressive silence was lifting. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a bird sing. I think so. I think it's finally done. We made it back to the station by evening. The dogmen's tracks were still visible, but there was no sign of the pack itself. Without the Wendigo to lead them, they'd probably retreated deeper into the forest. They were dangerous, yes, but they were animals. Dangerous animals could be managed. Ancient evil, that was different. The next morning, a maintenance crew arrived. Ezra had hiked out at first light, made it to a ranger station 20 miles south, called in reinforcements. They brought new trucks, new equipment, new personnel, and new questions. We told them about the bear attack, about the structural damage to the cabin, about everything except the truth, because who would believe the truth? Ezra retired 2 weeks later. He said he'd had enough, that he'd earned his rest. Thomas didn't argue. I stayed, training the new rangers, teaching them the unofficial rules, where not to go, what sounds to ignore, when to trust your instincts and retreat. The desolation was officially closed to all access, permanent barriers erected. The official reason was unstable terrain, but I made sure every ranger knew the real reason. Some of them thought I was crazy. Some of them believed. All of them followed the rules. I'm still here, 3 years later. Station 47, Hiawatha National Forest. Some nights I still hear howling in the distance. The dogmen hunting. But the cold is gone. The hunger is gone. The Wendigo died that day in the forest, and it took its winter with it. Sometimes I dream about it. About those yellow eyes filled with intelligence and agony. About the voice like winter wind, offering me a choice, flee or feed. In the dreams I understand something Nathan had understood. The Wendigo was human once. Just a man, driven by desperation to do the unthinkable. And in doing so, he became something that could never be human again. A warning, a reminder of what happens when we let hunger, any hunger, consume us. The bones are still out there, beneath the old king. I visit them once a year, usually in autumn when the leaves turn. Just to make sure, just to remember. The forest has its monsters. Maybe it always will. But we beat the worst of them. And sometimes on clear days when the wind is right, I think the forest remembers too. The trees stand a little taller. The sun shines a little brighter. We drove out the hunger. We ended the endless winter. And that has to be enough. They say the wilderness doesn't care about us, that nature is indifferent to human survival. Maybe that's true for most forests. But there are places where something older than trees watches from the shadows. Places where the old stories aren't just stories. Places where rangers learn to trust their fear, because fear is the thing that keeps you alive. Station 47 is still operational. The Hiawatha National Forest is still open with restrictions. And somewhere in those 750,000 acres, in the deep places where the sun never quite reaches, things that shouldn't exist still walk between the trees. I know, I've seen them. My name is Matthew. I'm a park ranger. And this is what they don't tell you in the training manual. The forest remembers. And so do I. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that someone believes what I'm about to tell you. 23 years. I've worn this forest green uniform, walked these trails until my boots wore through, memorized every creek bed and ridgeline in the Monongahela National Forest. 23 years of thinking I understood these woods. I was wrong. It started last October, the 17th to be exact. The leaves had turned brilliant orange and gold, carpeting the forest floor in a way that made hikers stop and take pictures every few feet. I was stationed at the Spruce Knob Ranger Station, the highest point in West Virginia. Most days were routine, checking permits, maintaining trails, occasionally rescuing lost hikers who thought their phone's GPS would work in the deep hollows. That morning, I found Matthew Brennan's campsite. Matthew was a wildlife photographer from Richmond who'd registered for a 5-day backcountry permit. He was 3 days overdue. His tent stood perfectly erected near Seneca Creek, sleeping bag still rolled out inside. Camera equipment worth thousands sitting on a folding table. His truck was parked exactly where he'd noted on his permit. Everything looked normal except for one detail that made my skin crawl: the absolute silence. No birds, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. The forest held its breath like it was waiting for something to pass. I called it in, started the standard missing person protocol. While waiting for the search team, I documented the scene. That's when I noticed the tracks. They started about 30 feet from Matthew's tent, circling it in a wide arc. At first glance, they looked like barefoot human prints, but they were wrong. Too long, maybe 14 inches. The toes splayed out unnaturally wide, and there were claw marks at the tips, deep gouges in the soft earth. The stride length bothered me more than the prints themselves. I'm 6'2", and when I tried to match the gait, I had to take ridiculous lunging steps. Whatever made these tracks stood at least 7.5 feet tall. I followed them away from camp, down toward the creek. They led to a small clearing where the earth was torn up like something had been dragged. Dark stains colored the disturbed leaves, blood, though I didn't want to admit it then. The drag marks led into the dense rhododendron thickets that covered the steep hillside. The search team arrived 2 hours later. 6 volunteers, 2 deputies, and Carter Hughes, our head ranger who'd been doing this job since before I was born. Carter took one look at those tracks and pulled me aside. "You ever hear the old-timers talk about things in these mountains?" he asked, voice low enough the volunteers couldn't hear. "Ghost stories," I said. "Campfire tales." He shook his head. "No, son. Real stories. Stories that made the Cherokee avoid certain valleys. Stories that kept the early settlers inside after dark, no matter what they heard outside their cabins." I wanted to laugh, but Carter's expression stopped me. In 2 decades, I'd never seen him rattled. He was rattled now. "We'll search the standard grid," he announced to the team. "But nobody goes into those thickets alone. Groups of 3 minimum, and everyone's back at base before sunset. No exceptions." We found Matthew's camera first, smashed against a tree trunk about a quarter mile from his camp. The memory card was intact. When we reviewed the images back at the station, my blood went cold. The last 50 photos were taken in rapid succession, the timestamp showing 2:47 a.m. They started as typical wildlife shots: a doe at the creek, an owl on a branch. Then the images became blurry, chaotic, the camera's flash firing repeatedly. In one frame between the motion blur and darkness, 2 eyes reflected the flash. They were at least 8 feet off the ground, glowing with that distinctive eyeshine of a predator. But the spacing was wrong for any animal native to West Virginia. They were too far apart, set in what looked like a face that was almost human but stretched and distorted. We never found Matthew's body. 3 nights later, I was alone at the station, filing reports and trying to convince myself those tracks belonged to a bear with deformed paws. Around midnight, something triggered the motion sensors on the north trail. I checked the monitors, nothing. The sensors triggered again, this time on the east trail, then the south. Whatever was out there was circling the station. I grabbed my rifle and flashlight, stepped onto the porch. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees since sunset, and my breath clouded in the beam of light. I swept the flashlight across the tree line, saw nothing but shadows dancing between the trunks. Then I smelled it. Wet dog mixed with rotting meat so strong it made my eyes water. Something moved in my peripheral vision, just outside the flashlight's reach. When I turned, it was gone. But I heard breathing, deep rhythmic breathing that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I backed toward the station door, rifle raised. That's when I saw it properly for the first time. It stood at the edge of the clearing, just inside the tree line. Bipedal, covered in dark fur that looked black in the darkness. Its head was wrong elongated like a wolf's, but sitting on shoulders that were almost human in their broadness. When it moved, it did so with a horrible grace. Part man, part beast, wholly wrong. Our eyes met across the 30 yards of open ground. Intelligence looked back at me, cold and calculating. This wasn't some animal. It knew exactly what it was doing, had been testing our defenses, learning our patterns. The creature opened its mouth, too many teeth arranged in rows like a shark's, and made a sound I'll never forget. Not quite a howl, not quite a scream, but something between the two that made primitive parts of my brain scream to run. Instead, I raised my rifle. The movement broke the spell. The thing turned and melted back into the forest, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. Within seconds, even the sound of its passage had faded. I spent the rest of the night barricaded inside the station, rifle across my lap, listening to it circle the building. Sometimes it would scratch at the walls with what sounded like claws. Sometimes it would make that horrible howl scream. Just before dawn, everything went quiet. When the sun came up, I found tracks all around the station. The same elongated prints, but now I could see details I'd missed before. The ball of the foot had paw pads like a dog's, but the heel was distinctly human. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't entirely one thing or the other. I should have requested a transfer after that night. Should have walked away from these mountains and never looked back. But I had to know what was happening in my forest. That decision cost 3 more people their lives. 2 weeks after Matthew Brennan disappeared, we got a call about screaming near the Dolly Sods wilderness. Not normal screaming. The caller, an experienced backpacker named Ezra Chen, described it as like someone being torn apart, but lasting too long to be human. I drove out with 2 other rangers, Thomas McKay and Gabriel Winters. We found Ezra at the Red Creek trailhead, visibly shaken. He led us 3 miles into the wilderness to where he'd heard the screams. The smell hit us first, death and decay so thick it coated the back of your throat. We found the source in a small grove of hemlocks. What was left of 2 hikers, later identified as a couple from Ohio, had been arranged almost ceremonially. Their bodies were torn open, organs removed with surgical precision, the empty cavities filled with stones and pine boughs. Their heads were missing. Gabriel threw up. Thomas called it in while I searched the perimeter. I found tracks, but not the dogman prints from before. These were different, massive, human-like, but with a stride that suggested something close to 8 feet tall. The prints pressed deep into the earth, indicating enormous weight. Near one print, a tuft of reddish-brown hair caught on a thorn bush moved in the breeze. Bigfoot, Thomas said when he saw the prints. He tried to laugh, but it came out strangled. Can't be. But we all knew the stories. Every ranger who'd worked these mountains more than a few years had either seen something or knew someone who had. Massive, hair-covered beings spotted at distance. Wood knocks in the night, that distinctive musky smell that had no natural source. This was different from the stories, though. Bigfoot tales were about shy, elusive creatures that avoided humans. Whatever did this wasn't avoiding anyone. We cordoned off the scene, waited for state police. But while we waited, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The arrangement of the bodies, the stones and pine boughs. I'd seen something similar in an old book about Native American folklore. It was a warning, or a territorial marker. That night, back at the station, Carter called me into his office. He pulled out a bottle of whiskey from his desk, poured 2 glasses. His hands shook slightly. My grandfather was a ranger here, he said. Back in the 30s, he kept journals that the family never shared with anyone. I think you need to see them. The journals were water-stained and yellowing, filled with cramped handwriting. As I read, my skepticism crumbled. Carter's grandfather had documented dozens of encounters over his 30-year career. Creatures that walked upright but weren't human. Things with glowing eyes that followed rangers on their rounds. Hikers who vanished without a trace, only to have their bodies found weeks later, mutilated in ways that made no sense. One entry from 1937 stood out. The Cherokee were right to avoid these mountains. There are older things here than we understand. They tolerate us when we're few, but when too many come, when we push too deep into their territory, they push back. We've lost 4 hikers this month. The state says it's bears, but I've seen the tracks. I've smelled that ungodly stench. These aren't bears. They're not anything that modern science recognizes, and I fear they're getting bolder. Why didn't anyone report this? I asked Carter. Report what? That park rangers believe in monsters? How long do you think the park would stay open? How many jobs would be lost? He drained his glass. We manage it. Keep people away from the hot spots. Close trails when activity increases. Most of the time it works. Most of the time? Every couple of decades something changes. They get aggressive, territorial, like now. Over the next 3 days, we had 2 more disappearances. A solo hiker named Isaac Morrison vanished from the North Fork Mountain Trail. His pack was found scattered across a half-mile stretch, torn apart with inhuman strength. A Forest Service worker named Dylan Park never made it back from checking trail markers. We found his truck, driver's door ripped off its hinges, seats shredded and covered in that same reddish-brown hair. The state police brought in search dogs, but they refused to track. The handlers had never seen anything like it. The dogs would whimper, tuck their tails, and refuse to leave their handlers' sides. One German shepherd, a veteran search dog with dozens of successful finds, took one sniff of Dylan's torn seat and howled in terror. On the fourth night, everything changed. I was staying at the Seneca Shadows campground, helping coordinate the search efforts. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of wood knocking. 3 distinct raps, a pause, then 3 more. Classic Bigfoot behavior, according to the researchers I'd desperately been reading. But this was different. The knocks came from multiple directions, like they were communicating. I grabbed my rifle and flashlight, stepped out of my cabin. The campground security lights created pools of yellow illumination with deep shadows between. In those shadows, things moved. They came from 3 directions at once. 2 were massive, hair-covered beings that moved with surprising grace for their size, what the conspiracy theorists would call Sasquatch. But the third made my blood freeze. It walked on legs that bent the wrong way, too thin for its height, with arms that hung past its knees. Its skin looked pale and stretched in the security lights. And its face, God, its face was human but wrong, features sharp and angular, mouth too wide, filled with teeth that belonged in a predator's skull. The Wendigo. I knew it instantly from the old stories. A creature born of cannibalism and winter starvation, forever hungry, forever hunting. They stopped just outside the light, watching me. The 2 Sasquatch flanked the Wendigo like soldiers. This wasn't random, this was coordinated. The Wendigo spoke. Not with words, but somehow its meaning pressed into my mind like frozen needles. Images flashed, the forest before humans, ancient and undisturbed. Then settlers, loggers, miners, trees falling, mountains scarred, rivers poisoned, and finally a warning clear as spoken words: leave, or feed the forest. I understood then. We weren't dealing with random attacks. This was a coalition. Different species that had coexisted in these mountains, long before we arrived, now united against what they saw as an invasion. We can coexist, I said aloud, feeling foolish but desperate. We can find a balance. The Wendigo tilted its head, an almost bird-like gesture that was deeply unsettling on that elongated skull. Then it screamed. Not the howl scream of the dogman, but something that bypassed my ears and went straight to my spine. Every window in the campground shattered, car alarms went off, and in the distance answering calls echoed from the mountains. Dozens of them. They left then, melting back into the forest, but the message was clear. This was just the beginning. The campground evacuation was chaos, families fleeing in the middle of the night, rangers trying to maintain order while hiding our own terror. The official story was a gas leak, potential explosion risk. Nobody questioned it. They were too eager to leave. Within 12 hours, we'd cleared every campground and trail in a 40-mile radius. The state police set up roadblocks. The media was told it was a chemical spill from an old mining operation. Carter and I knew better. We were abandoning the field. Lincoln Walsh, a ranger from the Potomac District, didn't believe in strategic withdrawal. He'd been with the service for 15 years, had a reputation for being fearless, to the point of stupidity. When Carter ordered all personnel to stay out of the closure zone, Lincoln went in anyway. He live-streamed it on his phone, thinking he'd prove we were overreacting. The footage is probably still out there on the internet, though most people assume it's fake. The video starts with Lincoln mocking the evacuation order, hiking up the Seneca Rocks Trail in broad daylight. For the first hour, nothing happens. Then you can hear it. Wood knocks in the distance. Lincoln laughs, says it's just branches falling. The knocks get closer. At the 90-minute mark, something parallels him through the trees. The camera catches glimpses, dark fur, movement too fast to track. Lincoln's breathing gets heavier. He stops joking. "There's something here," he says to the camera. "Multiple somethings." The trail opens into a clearing. In the center, arranged in a perfect circle, are heads. Human heads on wooden stakes, faces twisted in terminal fear. Some are fresh, some are decades old, mummified by the mountain air. Matthew Brennan's is among them, eyes gone, mouth open in an eternal scream. Lincoln runs. The camera shakes wildly, catching fragments of pursuit. Something bipedal crashes through the underbrush behind him, then alongside, then ahead. They're hurting him. The video ends at a cliff overlook. Lincoln turns the camera to his face. He's crying. "They're all around me," he whispers. "God, there's so many. Tell my wife." The camera drops. In the final frames, you can see them emerging from the tree line. Dozens of creatures. Sasquatch. The elongated horror of Wendigo. Dogmen running on all fours and standing upright. And other things. Things that don't match any folklore I know. Lincoln's body was never found. His phone was left on the trail, placed carefully on a rock like a message. The closure zone expanded. The governor called in the National Guard, told them they were looking for eco-terrorists. 3 units went in, 1 came out. Sergeant Anthony Reeves was the sole survivor of his unit. I interviewed him in the hospital where he was being treated for exposure and what the doctors called acute stress disorder. His story matched nothing in the official report. We made camp near Spruce Knob, he told me, hands shaking as he held a cup of coffee. First night was quiet. Second night, Private Morrison saw something. Said it looked like a man covered in hair, watching us from a ridge. We laughed it off. Third night they came for us. Not attacking, just showing themselves. Circles of eyes in the darkness, reflecting our lights. Hundreds of them. The lieutenant ordered us to hold position. Don't fire unless fired upon. Then the fog came. Thick, unnatural fog that rolled down from the mountain like water. In that fog, things moved. Jenkins started screaming. Said something was in his head, showing him things. Thompson opened fire at Shadows. And Martinez. Something took Martinez. Pulled him into the fog so fast we only heard him scream once. We ran. Left our equipment, our dignity, everything. But they let us go, one of us. They let one of us go to tell the story. The military pulled back. Scientists were brought in. Cryptozoologists, anthropologists, even some people from agencies that officially don't exist. They set up monitoring equipment at safe distances, used drones to survey the closure zone. What they found challenged everything we thought we knew. Heat signatures of bipedal creatures throughout the mountains. Audio recordings of complex vocalizations that suggested language. Video footage of structures not quite buildings but deliberate constructions that served unknown purposes. Dr. Joshua Chen, one of the researchers, shared his findings with me off the record. We're not dealing with undiscovered animals, he said. These are intelligent beings with their own culture, their own society. They've been here far longer than us, and we've been encroaching on their territory for centuries. So what do? I asked. We leave them alone, set boundaries, respect their space, or, he paused, choosing his words carefully, or they'll solve the problem their way. The closure zone became permanent. 100 square miles of the Monongahela National Forest off-limits to everyone. The official story keeps changing. Toxic waste, unstable mine shafts, endangered species protection. Anything but the truth. But I know the truth, and more importantly, they know we know. Sometimes, on quiet nights at my new posting 3 states away, I think about those mountains, about the ancient things that walk those ridges, that gather in those hollows. They're still there, watching, waiting, making sure we keep our distance. Other rangers have similar stories now, from different forests. The Adirondacks, the Cascades, the Ozarks, places where the old things have decided humanity has pushed far enough. Lines have been drawn, boundaries established, and God help anyone who crosses them. Nathan Cross, a ranger in Oregon, sent me photos last month. Same tracks, same ritualistic arrangements, same message. This is our forest, stay out. The Park Service knows, the government knows, but what can they do? Declare war on things that officially don't exist? Evacuate millions of acres of forest permanently? Tell the truth and watch civilization panic? So we manage it. We redirect hikers, we close trails, we make excuses, and when someone disappears, we search in all the wrong places, knowing we'll never find them. But the creatures are getting bolder. The closure zones are expanding, and I wonder how long before they decide that coexistence is no longer an option. I'm writing this down because someone needs to know. When the forests go quiet, when the animals flee, when that smell of wet dog and decay fills the air, don't investigate, don't be a hero, just run. They were here first. They'll be here long after we're gone, and they're tired of sharing. Last week I got a package with no return address. Inside was a single photo, me at my new posting taken from the tree line. The message was clear. They know where I am. They know where we all are. I've put in for early retirement. I'm moving to the city, somewhere with concrete and steel and lights that never go out. Somewhere the old things can't follow, or so I hope. But sometimes, late at night, I hear that howl scream in the distance. Even here, 300 miles from the nearest forest, and I wonder if anywhere is far enough. The ancient pact is broken. The wild things are reclaiming their territory, and we're not the apex predators we thought we were. God help us all when they decide the forests aren't enough.